The sun shines so bright to bring the true essence of life to all mankind. Light, warmth, and love are all provided to us by the sun. But only a few of us can recognize the beauty that is shown to us by the sun. Why? Is it because they can't feel the heat, like they are dead heroes, since their bodies are cold because their soul's temperatures are way below 0 degrees? They cease to live. They cease to live, but continue to exist, cruising without a compass in this ship of life. Their minds and eyes are directed by what they can see only through the nakedness of their eye. Minds are paralyzed, intoxicated, high and hypnotized by what their naked eyes make them see. They can't feel anything, blink, or even think as a life ship sinks deep under the blood sea, drowning in their own blood with no hope of a lifeboat or even self-pride to hold on to. But who am I to tell you what I've seen through these 3 eyes of mine? I'm just a common man trying to make some sense out of this madness. Dumelang kaofela. So the question that I try to align to the theme is a very age-old question about who we are, our identity, and with everything that's happening around the world, whether we're looking at the 30 years of democracy, or what's happening in the Middle East, or anywhere else in the world, what's happening, it seems to suggest to me that we need to revisit how we identify ourselves as humans. So this question, this poem is a question that I'm posing. Maybe it'll inform the discussion, but I'll share others later. Who are we? Who are we and what are we here for? Who are we and what are we made of? What are we made from? Are we made from the most fertile soil that's supposed to nourish seeds of joy, love, and peace? Or are we made to become slaves to our selfish dreams? Enslaved by the earthly pleasures. The temperature is rising, and the question I'm asking is, can you overcome the pressure? Relentlessly chasing what we still cannot see or even recognize. The sun is blazing, but there's still some among us who can't identify their own shadows. Because the path we walk on is so narrow, only a few can make it through. Those who still can see their own shadows and are able to read the writing that's on the wall. But only blind men can read it. Those whose eyes have been blinded by visions that protect them from wicked temptations this sickening world has in store for us. Maybe weak is what we are, but who are we? From the olden days of dark caves to this golden age of cyberspace, we're still fumbling in a maze, battling to escape from the clutches of Satan. Trapped in a mental cage and the key is thrown away. The only way to escape is through the gate that leads to a sophisticated cage where new age slaves are trained to work for a minimum wage, hoping their situation will change. Coming out of the cages, smiling, feeling brave and ready to face this crazed up world? Or so we hope. Who are we? Are we the most vicious animals whose sole purpose is to continuously breed cannibals? Cannibals who'll soon be eating us? Are we creatures that are most civilized? If your answer is yes, then my question is, why do we still live in these times of fear? Children cry of hunger and bullets replace their tears. Are we leaders of the world who travel the universe in search of the truth? Not even 10 bulletproof vests can protect you from the truth because its penetration hurts so bad. Are we the only ones that know what the truth is and where it's buried? If we are soldiers in a battlefield, let's kill all our enemies. Hatred and vanity, jealousy and greed, before we exhume the truth and resurrect LOVE. But first, we have to know who we are and what are we here for. Who are we and what are we made of? What are we made from? Are we made from the most fertile soil that's supposed to nourish seeds of joy, love, and peace? Or are we made to become slaves to our selfish dreams of greed? Or are we made to become slaves to other people's greed? Maybe we are not who we think we are. Who are we? Who are we?
Mutufela. Mutufela. Just a person. Mutufela. Please do a poet snap. A poet snap. Microphone guys are looking at me. They're upset. An announcement apparently. Before I make that announcement, let's make other announcements. Yes. Do you want to go ahead, comrade leader?
Okay. All right. Should I go through the program?
No. Let's discuss the methodology. Let's discuss the method to the madness first.
Okay. Comrades, you all received the program by email. The purpose of the gathering is to do two things. The first is to critically reflect on the past 30 years of democracy, especially from the perspective of social movements. The second is to start thinking about how people's movements, ordinary people, can use democracy to deepen power, what we call reclaim a democracy from below. So we have three themes through the 2.5 days. The first one, which starts now and ends at the end of the day, is a reflection on the past 30 years of democracy. The second one, which starts tomorrow, for the whole day tomorrow, is reimagining democracy. So looking at the tools of democracy and how we can use the tools to deepen people's power. The third one, which is on day 3, just for the morning, is strategies to reclaim a democracy from below. So 3 themes. And the logic of the program works in this way. We don't have note takers or repertoires taking notes in plenary. We're going to allow participants to engage and create the output. What comes out of the 3 days, the report that comes out of the 3 days. How we're going to do that is after every theme. So at the end of today, before we leave, we're going to have breakaway groups. And in the breakaway groups, we have a facilitator and a note taker, and comrades are going to engage in the content, come up with some conclusions, come up with critiques, come up with some points of action, and that's going to happen each day after every theme. And those consolidated notes is going to form part of a gathering report, which we'll present part of it at the end of day 3. So on Thursday morning, we'll present the consolidated report.
And the deep engagement only happens in the breakaway groups. So when we're here in plenary, there won't be a question and answer. So any speaker that we have here sitting and any moderator that's here, they're in conversation with each other and with us. But once they're done, we will only be able to engage with the substance that they shared with us in the breakaway groups. Because that's then where we go deeper and engage in conversation. Because when we do it in plenary, there's an assumption that those who are sitting here are the full tapestry of knowledge. But knowledge is in every one of us. So that's just a reminder.
Can you welcome the 10 people on the Zoom?
Oh yeah, there's. No, it's not 10 people. There's 11 people on the YouTube stream, and then there's 67 people who registered for the Zoom. Welcome to the Zoom, and welcome to the YouTube. We're in 2024, right? We're in 2024. There are people who are virtually joining us. It's not just the room. There's many rooms in people's homes. Welcome to the stream. Okay, I did. Next.
Thank you. Okay, let's introduce the first panel. The first session is on reflecting on 30 years of democracy from the perspective of movements. So most comrades will know, before this, we had a day where movements were engaging on issues of democracy, social movements, what we call the movement caucus. The movement caucus will continue after the last session on Thursday. Some of the comrades that were in the movement caucus will come, give some feedback from that space, but also, more importantly, from their experience and the experience of the movements that they come from. The facilitator is Hameeda Deedat, and the speakers, Princess Majola, Ruth, and Thapelo.
Please come to Oprah Winfrey's couch. Oh, come to Oprah Winfrey's couch. My goodness. Also, comrades, if you are waiting for a particular start, you're not going to get it. This is not a normal conference. If you thought this is a normal conference, you're sorely mistaken. So if you're uncomfortable, check yourself. Complete. Yes. Okay. Oh, Comrade Princess. Yes, like. You know, I usually only see Comrade Princess when we're in a march. Yes, like. Look at us, as Chulugi today, ne? Damn it, man. Oh, Comrade Thapelo. Okay. Yes, all of you mics. Yeah, we are elites. Comrades, because the microphone people will be upset, I must give you microphone etiquette. Even though I bragged about not using a shop steward voice, we do need to project. So those with a microphone, please don't bring it close to your mouth, and also don't bring it down here. Project. Thank you, comrades.
Amandla. Amandla. So, comrade, I have an amazing opportunity, and I think I'm really honored to be the facilitator to open the first session. Okay, so I'm Hameeda. As I was introduced, and I must say I'm deeply honored to have the opportunity to open the first session. Sorry, I'm repeating because they need to record. I have a really, really esteemed panel. You've got 15 minutes each, and I'm hoping that the remaining 15 minutes will just allow for questions of clarity, and maybe also to probe if it is that any of the speakers missed the key essence, which is in relation to speaking to the question of democracy and the manner in which we are now being challenged as a country and as a people in relation to how we take forward or claim back our democracy. So I've got three panelists, Comrade Ruth from NUMSA. I've got Comrade Thapelo, not from, okay, I know you from NUMSA, but you'll introduce who you are now. And then I've got Comrade Thapelo from Abahlali. I don't think any of the, in fact, this is really an esteemed panel, so I don't think they really need any introduction to those of us who've been in the space. For those who don't know them, please, you'll be in, keep your hand under your chin because you'll be in awe. And then Comrade Princess. So we're going to start off with Comrade Princess. You've got 15 minutes, and just as a reminder, the essence is to be reflecting on the challenges in relation to democracy in the last 30 years. So over to you.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Hameeda. Is it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Greetings, everyone. Reflecting on 30 years of democracy, perspectives from people's movements. I mean, when you define democracy, what is democracy? Democracy means rule by the people, a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodically held free elections. But then what is South African democracy? It is a parliamentary representative system wherein the president of South Africa, elected by parliament, is the leader of government and of a multi-party system, and the people are not entitled to influence important decisions affecting their lives. Democracy is at stake in South Africa. Since the end of apartheid, the South African government has functioned as a one-party dominant democracy. The African National Congress, the ANC, has provided political stability for an emergent nation that some feared will be torn apart by racial, ethnic, and tribal divisions. While at the same time, it has given rise to structures that have enabled political elites to accrue tremendous power, wealth, and influence through corruption, patronage, and clientelism. As a consequence, South Africans are living in an increasingly flawed democracy, plagued by state capture that has resulted in it becoming one of the most inequitable countries in the world. Currently, there are growing fears that South Africa is teetering on the brink of state collapse and a debt crisis, leaving mainly to openly question the value of a democratic future that was delivered absent basic human rights and fundamental freedoms. The governing system of constitutional democracy means that the South African Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The introduction to the Constitution states that. Nevertheless, enshrined in the Constitution are a host of human rights that are regularly, if not constantly, trampled by the very South African government that claims to respect them. Chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights concisely lays out these rights, which include the right to life, the right to have one's dignity respected and protected, the right to bodily and psychological integrity, and the right to contribute, and the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being. Despite the fact that these rights are provided for in law, it doesn't help the dozens of people who died in Hammanskraal in May 2023 because of an unlawful tender and failure to upgrade the Rooiwal wastewater treatment plant, which caused a cholera outbreak. Nor does it comfort their families. It doesn't comfort the hundreds of mental health care patients whose dignity was abhorrently abused in the Life Esidimeni scandal. And it definitely won't bring back the 141 who died. It doesn't comfort the women and children assaulted and murdered every day, or the whistleblowers terrorized by those whose nefarious activities they expose. And yet, everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law. As the same Constitution proclaims, betrayal of the Constitution is a betrayal of democracy. Democracy in South Africa means, number one, unemployment. Where unemployment rates, particularly amongst youth and women, is still high. Limited job creation, lack of skills, and structural barriers which contribute to the persistence of high economic inequalities. Number two, corruption. Corruption continues to be a significant challenge in South Africa, undermining democratic institutions, eroding public trust, and diverting resources away from critical public services. High-profile corruption scandals involving political leaders and public officials have highlighted the need for stronger anti-corruption measures and greater accountability. Number three, education. With the quality of education still remaining uneven and many schools lacking basic infrastructure and resources, educational outcomes continue to be influenced by socio-economic factors, perpetuating cycles of poverty and inequality. Number four, crime and violence. High levels of crime and violence, including gender-based violence, pose a threat to South Africa's democracy. Inadequate law enforcement and historical legacies contribute to the persistence of crime, thus undermining citizens' sense of security and trust in the state. If democracy in South Africa means dilapidated buildings in the city, killing 77 people, and no one is to blame but the unemployed homeless people. If it means 2,400 teaching jobs being cut off, and the government having to choose cutting off feeding schemes in schools in order to save teachers' jobs, but not cutting off incentives given to MPs and their salaries, because it's thanks to the government we are in this mess. When mothers resort to killing themselves and their children due to poverty and starvation, when 15 billion is returned back to the treasury by the former minister Lindiwe Zulu, while beneficiaries go to bed hungry and beneficiaries are given that insult of a 370, then democracy in South Africa is for the rich. And let us remember the warnings of the late Comrade Chris Hani when he said, what I fear, I quote, what I fear is that the liberators emerge as elitists who drive around in Mercedes-Benz and use the resources of the country to live in palaces and to gather riches. Then democracy in South Africa is a concept to be feared. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Promise. I think that was a really provoking presentation. I think a lot of the issues that you raise, many of us sitting here either know of people or sometimes even family members who are experiencing some of these plights. I think the point around gender-based violence, the crime, the inequality, I think the privatization, not just of services, but even food. And I think you so adequately put the point around, how do you have a government say, well, you're actually going to make a trade-off between food schemes, teachers, and you continue to have corruption, you continue to pay incentives to those who don't need to. And if you think about the tons and millions of amounts of money that just get squandered, and nobody's being held accountable. So thank you very much for really setting the tone. And for saving time, I must be.
For me, it's a pleasure to be with you, the working class and marginalized, and finding ways of getting ourselves out of this problem. In the end, I'm going to touch about the division between ourselves and what divides us. There is a saying that a bull can be chased by a small boy, and that bull doesn't know its power. That if one day that bull will turn back, that small boy will run away. And that is the power that we have, but we have not realized that if we use that power and work together and not in isolation, we will be able to defeat the system that we are facing, because we are that strong bull. When I was told that we are going to reflect on the 30 years of democracy, I recall, without revealing my age, in 1994, I was not voting, but I was very young. And my father took us to a pool in Blue Lagoon, in Durban, and we were starting to learn to swim. And the idea behind that is that we are going to own this in our house, and you better learn how to swim now. So there was that excitement from my father. Little did I know that 20 years later, I will inherit the very shed that we were living under back then. I will continue to be faced with fire, washed away by floods in post-apartheid South Africa. I did not know that we will suffer from starvation, suffer from diseases as a result of the conditions that we live under in shared settlements. And over the years, as I grew up, I have seen people being burnt alive in the new South Africa. I have seen people, pregnant people, not so long ago, 2 weeks ago, was burnt alive, a 28-year-old woman. Now, this is the reality of a 30-year of democracy in South Africa. This is freedom without land. This is freedom for those who are poor to continue to drown in poverty. This is freedom where the corrupt elite continue to steal money that is meant to service the poor and marginalized in our community. And that is when you ask me to reflect about freedom. That is my reflection. I lived in a shack until I was faced with assassination and I was removed. I'm currently in hiding. I come from a movement that has lost 25 of its leaders. 14 have been assassinations. And that is the freedom we are talking about, where the poor and marginalized continue to be repressed and attacked. And when people come out and speak about it, you are then removed. I come from a province where removing somebody can cost as little as 15,000 rand. We know this because killers of one of our leaders, Tulindlovu, a woman who had 2 children, one of them was a minor. We know now in court that the killers were paid 15,000 rand. I have in my life, in the 30 years of democracy, the so-called freedom, have responded to many of our activists being shot and swimming in blood for speaking out against the corruption that is taking place in government. So if you ask me about this democracy, the freedom that we have, at this age that I am today, I will tell you that it is still unfreedom, which is why my movement, when the country celebrates Freedom Day, we say it's unfreedom. Because freedom was robbed from us. We recognize that freedom was fought for, that people have laid their lives for freedom, that people went to prison for this freedom. But the current leadership under the ANC-led government have robbed us of that freedom. People who are living in shack settlements in Khayelitsha, in Kennedy Road, in Mpumalanga, in Johannesburg, who are living without services. I'm talking about women who are sexually harassed on their way to seek a basic necessity like water and sanitation. This cannot be happening in post-apartheid South Africa. And hence, I say that the ANC is a group and a bunch of criminals who have come to take our freedom, who have come to rob our freedom from us. And we continue, because we were told when the ANC came out from exile and were coming into power, we were told that we must leave the struggle one side, because now we are going to be free. Hence, when our movement was formed in 2005, a lot of people were surprised that how does a black government have a movement, a social movement, marching against it in post-apartheid South Africa? And we did that. And this was organic, happening all over the country. And when we were sat down and we decided what to call ourselves, because we had blockaded the biggest road in Durban, the M19. Some of the comrades are here with us today who were part of that protest, where 12 people were arrested. We then had to convene in a community hall. And after that, it was decided, what are we going to name ourselves? We started a struggle that is huge as this. What can we name ourselves? And somebody from the ground, an old man, said, we live in shack settlements. Why don't we call ourselves the residents of the shacks? Abahlali basemjondolo. So this was the time when the struggle was owned by the people for themselves. So there were no brains behind, no academics. There were just people who were at that time saying enough is enough. We can no longer sit in our little corner and say that ANC is going to liberate us one day. We are seeing the reality of the ANC, that it's no longer representing the needs of the poor and marginalized, and therefore we are going to take to the streets. And in 2009, the comrades who are here today, Comrade Zodwa and Comrade Zandile and Sibandi, are today displaced because the ANC had to burn down their house, destroy their homes when they were speaking out against the corruption that was taking place at that time. And 2 people were killed. And that was the first start of the repressions and the attack of the killings of Abahlali. So when you ask me again about the 30 years of democracy, it is 30 years of murder of the working class, as we have seen in Marikana. It is the 30 years of democracy, of the murder of activists like Umamu Ufikile Ntshangase, no Bazuka Hadebe, and many other activists in Abahlali baseMjondolo and other social movement, environmentalists, who have been killed by this government, who has forced us to accept mining in our own lands, who have moved our people from their land forcefully, trying to please capitalists who are coming from the West to come and mine our land. It is the blood of Ayanda Ngila. It is the blood of Lindokuhle Mnguni. It's the blood of Nokuthula Mabaso. It's the blood of Sibonelo Mpeku. It's the blood of Nkululeko Gwala. It's the blood of Umbela. It's the blood of Mngomezulu. It's the blood of Siyabonga Manqele. Those were my comrades whom I walked side by side, who have been killed by the ANC-led government. And we are not making allegations that are unfounded, because the 3 people who have been in the 3 where we have justice, those were members, high-ranking, a PR councillor of the ANC and an ANC councillor, and recently an ANC Youth League leader in one of the ward. So we are not casting aspersion when we say that we are being killed by the ANC, and the national government is not doing anything about that. So if no one is doing anything from government, therefore it's because they are protecting their own people in the ANC. So it has been 30 years of repression. It has been 30 years of hunger, starvation, and frustration for the poor and marginalized in this country. We continue to die like animals in the shacks. When there are shack fires, we wonder how many people have died. When there is floods, more than 300 people died in Durban in 2022 floods. The majority of those were people in the informal settlement. Some of them we had to dig down on the ground to get them out. So if you ask me to reflect, comrades, on the 30 years of the so-called democracy, that is my reflection. If you ask me to reflect, comrades, about the 30 years of democracy, is a democracy that is fake, that has led to us being landless. We have not had access to land. As I was coming here, comrades, the municipality in Durban, in this so-called GNU, because they now allowing the NIMBYs to come and evict people, because there are those white people who still feel that they can no longer, they cannot live along black people. And therefore now it's a time for them, because they are in government. So now it's time for them to remove black people away from the suburbs, to remove black people away from the cities that they've built, because black people are not supposed to be there. In one of the eviction, they say that the black people in that informal settlement do not have access to sanitation, and therefore they use bushes to relieve themselves, which causes health hazard for us white people. This is in Palito in Durban. So as I was coming into the airport, I'm responding to 3 evictions that are taking place already. So I'm also reflecting on the GNU that has been being a lot of people have been spoken about it's working and so forth. But it is going to drive the poor and the working class away from the city. It's going to exploit the current working class that is working. It's going to ensure that those who are unemployed remain unemployed. There's going to be high rates of poverty. There's going to be illiteracy will grow because those that are in power would want their interest of the apartheid regime to come back. So this is apartheid coming back via backdoor. So these people are not there to serve us. They are there to serve their agenda. And in serving their agenda, they're going to promote capitalism. They're going to promote neocolonialism. They're going to ensure that the working class continue to drown in poverty, in debts, and therefore we must expect more people going hungry, more people dying as a result of starvation. We are going to see a lot of people cooking wild plants in order to survive, whereas we have seen it during COVID. So we are going to see a highest number of people that are going to drown in poverty and starvation. So if we don't organize now and put our differences aside, we are going to find ourselves being exploited by capitalism again. Thank you very much.
Specific examples that you raised, I think, begin for all of us to really speak to the kinds of pain that this democracy of 30 years has held. And I think you've just touched the surface. And Comrade Promise, I think when you spoke to the issue of Hammanskraal, the issue around cholera, the issue around gender-based violence and harassment, I think these are becoming symptomatic of what we're seeing as our 30 years of democracy. And I think the important point before I give over to Comrade Ruth is we need to be reflecting on solidarity, unity. How do we reclaim our democracy? So let me give back to Comrade Ruth. There you go.
Thank you so much. Amandla. Awethu. Thank you so much. My name is Ruth Ntlokotse. I am a worker. I'm an activist. I was once a NUMSA member, but I remain a metal worker by heart and an erstwhile deputy president of NUMSA who was expelled for claiming for accountability. The president of SAFTU who has decided to step aside. So this is who I am. We were reminded about the purpose of this gathering, that we are expected to critically reflect on the 30 years of democracy from the social justice perspective, reclaiming democracy from below. I mean, from the worker point of view, if I were to reflect on what would have transpired, critically so, for the past 30 years, I decided not to take that route. However, concentrate on the second aspect, which is reclaiming democracy from below. If the social movement, which is the social justice sector, wants to reclaim democracy from below, I'm actually following the cue from yesterday when the movement had their own caucus, especially the session that we had about Hlahluba session. These are the things that need to happen. Firstly, we need to define democracy and the democratic participation for society. There seem to be different connotation in terms of what is it that you are specifically referring to, both in terms of participatory and representative form of democracy. That's the first issue. I'll come back to that first issue. I want to concentrate on the second issue, which is the most pertinent and important aspect, especially for this gathering. If you want to reclaim democracy from below, firstly, our movement must be democratic themselves. We can't be talking about democracy without necessarily concentrating on what we are doing as social movement organization, including trade unions, community-based, all organization. I'm talking about their structures. Structures should be as democratic as possible. The definition that will come about in terms of what is that you are referring to, the representative, the participatory aspect of democracy, it should reflect on our structures. We tend to have practices that are not abiding to the principles and the policies that we agreed upon as social movement organization. That doesn't reflect democracy. We don't allow space or an opportunity for others to express themselves. Once people start to have dissenting views, we tend to label them otherwise. These are some of the things that we need to undo if you are truly committed in terms of building democracy from below, reclaiming democracy from below. We need to be tolerant of different views. You know, at some stage, people will continuously raise issues, and lack of tolerance, it is what is killing most of the organization. And we tend to monopolize the lives and the thinking of our members. We have this mentality, you know, from the organization that I'm coming from. We used to call them Deputy Lenin because of others. They seem to be talking Lenin more than the others. So we call them Deputy Lenin. So that's the monopolizing. Deputy Lenin, because of they seem to be talking about Lenin more than the others. If you start raising issues of Lenin, you are not taken seriously. So, monopoly of the lives of our members, I think it's very critical. And we tend to be proclaiming ourselves as the people who are able to speak or represent organization to an extent that when we start talking about abahlali basemjondolo, we cannot distinguish bahlali basemjondolo with Comrade Thapelo. When we say, you know, this is what bahlali basemjondolo are saying, Comrade Thapelo will be saying that you are taking me. That's the monopoly of the life of an organization. These are some of the tendencies that we need to undo if we are truly committed in reclaiming democracy from below. Abuse of power. This is linked to materialism and money. It is one of the determinants. Our structures, who should emerge? We make it a point that if we tend to disagree with you, you are not going to emerge. So these are some of the things that we need to make it a point that we undo them. Any attempt by the social movement must be democratic. I think I've already highlighted that. And you know, there are lessons coming from the labor movement that after the 1973, when the trade union rebuilds, because there was a process in which the trade union went through the process of rebuilding, we were taught that the union insisted that there has to be elections, there has to be a process of mandates, there has to be the right to recall, there has to be, they had to allow for a participatory democracy, meaning that the members of the organization must be able to participate in the livelihood of the organization. And to such an extent that the union knew that in order to win that in society, remember the orientation of the trade union at that particular time, the social movement union, as opposed to the business unionism that is currently prevailing. They knew that in order to win that in society, they have to practice that by themselves. Hence, I'm saying that you cannot be talking about things that you know for sure that in your organization, you are practicing them. You know, during the first session, the commission that we attended, I think that is very much pertinent, especially in relation to the structures. There was an important point that was raised by one of the comrades who was saying that, but why do we model our organization? Because of the commission that I attended, we're dealing with internal accountability. And the question that was posed was that, why do we model our organization with the system that we know that there won't be any accountability? So the organizations that are building or rebuilding, we need to shy away from modeling organization or the structures that we know that there won't be internal accountability. What I'm actually proposing is that we have to practice prefigurative politics. You know, from time to time, we continuously say, socialism is the future. Build it now. We went to an extent of saying that, you know, we want a non-sexist organization. Whereas you are a sexist. You practice sexism. I think we spoke about that, the challenges that women are confronted with in our social movement organization. How do you go out and proclaim that this is the type of a democracy that you envisage, whereas you don't practice it in your organization? So hence I'm saying that purity begins at home. We must start by being democratic ourselves. We need to prefigure the future in what you do in order for your organization to be a model for the type of democracy that we want. The second aspect, which is the first issue that I was talking about of defining democracy. You know, I mean, I'm coming from the labor movement myself. We normally talk about trade unions should be a mandate-driven organization. I mean, yesterday we spoke about the difference or the distinction that is not there between the NGO and the membership organization. It is assumed that the membership organization, whatever issues that they are raising on behalf of our members, which is democratic type of a representative type of a democracy. And from the union side, they realize that that is not sufficient. There has to be a bit of participation. Members of organization must be able to participate in the lives of the organization. So the question that I would like to leave us all is the one that's saying, how democratic you are as an organization. If you want to claim democracy from below, we need to be as democratic as possible. Some of us, we are victim because of lack of democracy from the organizations that we're coming from. Whereas when we go out and start critiquing or even criticizing the government, we raise the fact that the government is not democratic, whereas our organizations are not democratic themselves. So reclaiming democracy, it has to start within. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Comrade Ruth. So I think three key takeaways from your presentation. The one, obviously, reclaiming democracy. The second one, and I think it's not just about how democratic are we or our structures, but it's also the question that you raised in relation to sexism. We need to reflect on ourselves. So if you're in a conversation with someone and they happen to have a dissenting voice, how do you respond? Are you able to hear for the purpose of listening, or are you listening in order to respond without the patience, without the sensitivity, without the principles of democracy? Because it definitely starts from us as individuals. And then I think the other issue was in relation to the structures, and one has to look at whether it's participatory or representative democracy. But I'm also going to be slightly provocative because I think you did avoid some of the key challenges that we face as Labour. Firstly, we were not in an alliance with the government. We weren't even allowed as trade unions to organize as trade unions. When the 1994 came and we had our democracy, in fact, prior to that, at least COSATU was formed, right? And we could, as workers, unite under a common banner, whether it was FEDUSA or whether you were at NACTU. The point is you didn't have to be in a white union or a black union or a so-called Indian union. You could actually be workers of the world uniting under a common federation. The notion of profitability or business unionism was not a phenomena that we understood. Mandates, if you look at the current NEDLAC structure and the people who represent labor, I can say with absolute certainty to you that there's no mandate.
Recording
Certain
in progress.
people representing federations take decisions around economic or political decisions in relation to our lives and in relation to workers' lives that workers don't know about. I can be even more provocative. Did the workers of NUMSA or COSATU take a mandate that NUMSA should be expelled from COSATU? Right? So that's when we really need to start talking about democracy. If you talk about trade unions being no longer being placed under administration, trade unions not understanding that their actual function is to serve workers, and the sense of the institution is supposed to be by virtue of the fact that you are taking workers' subscriptions, and workers' subscriptions mean that you need to organize and represent workers' rights. When you become a union that's invested in the very same system that you're contesting, then there's a problem. One of the issues in relation to organizing from a union perspective was around global unionism, or organizing around a global value chain. Absolutely imperative because capital has restructured, but our function and structure as a trade union movement has remained the same. So how can you, and I give a simple example, if you go to Bidvest, the company that runs Airport Company South Africa, Bidvest does cleaning, Bidvest does outsourcing of food, Bidvest does flour, every single thing. How many unions organize? Everybody wants to be a general secretary. Everybody wants to be. Instead of saying, okay, well, I don't have a problem. You want to be the general secretary of 5 unions, fine, but why can't you all organize collectively? Because along the value chain, the stronger union gets the money, and the weaker union gets the peanuts. So where's worker solidarity? Where's worker solidarity that an injury to one is an injury to all? If you ask me what we've lost in the 30 years of democracy from a trade union movement is precisely that. We do not understand what is an injury to one is an injury to all anymore. It's as long as the injury is yours and it doesn't affect my pocket, then I'm fine. I mean, there's the right to strike that we've lost. There's the issue around collective bargaining. Who would have thought that we're unable to get wages, wage increases as the public sector? That a public sector government, the ANC government says to us, public sector workers, we will give you a 0 increase. They then renege on their collective bargaining agreement and use COVID as the reason. And I think your point, Promise, which still sends me reeling, we'll take away food from children. When we're suffering, when we know that the children of South Africa are suffering from malnutrition. The apartheid state, as sick as it was, recognized that black children should eat. Every single one of us who are my age and older went to school and you got either Milo or Nesquik with a peanut butter sandwich or a jam sandwich. At least at minimal, they knew you needed food in order to learn. There's a fundamental problem. So please forgive me, I come from the labor movement. I could not raise the fact that there's a fundamental challenge because we were supposed to be the vanguard of the working class. If you think about 30 years later, we are caught in capitalism. We are caught up in materialism. And we've lost our sense of identity. And workers are not claiming back the power. I think there was somebody who said, I think it was your point about if we all stand together and unite. It was around the bulldog. Was it the bull? What did you say? The bull. I think that's exactly it. As the working class, if we recognize that we are the epitome of the bull and we put our power together, then perhaps there's some hope. All right, so with that, I abused my power as the chair. Maybe take a couple of questions or reflections and also thank all the panelists for their input. Comrade Kia or somebody, could you just give me direction in terms of how many minutes do we have for the session before we close? No convener? Do I have 5 minutes, 10 minutes? 7 minutes. Okay. Any burning questions, comments, provocations from the floor? 1, 2, 3. Please remember your numbers. Okay, so let me start with those. And please, if you can state your name and the organization.
Amandla. Qina mhlali qina. My name is Zandile Nsibande from Abahlali baseMjondolo. Yeah, for me, I would like to second Comrade Thapelo. When he said this is 30 years of murder, for me, I'll also say this is 30 years of corruption. Because if it was 30 years of democracy, we should have adequate houses now, by now. We shouldn't be staying in the informal settlement. There's a lot of projects that are frozen because of corruption. All over, you can go to Durban, you can go to Cape Town, you can go to all over, there is corruption. We're also struggling for the housing list. There's no housing list in the informal settlement. When you're going to the municipalities and asking for housing list, they won't tell you when are they going to build for Kailisha, when are they going to build for Kennedy Road, when are they going to build for Chembisa. They don't give a housing list. Thank you.
Okay, Nakemo Tufela, I'm a common man, but my real name is Thabo. I represent a creative organization, Loction Connection Creative Stockfell. So I just wanted to say, first of all, I appreciate this initiative, this gathering, because it's raising issues that need to be highlighted. So I'd like to pick up on what both Thapelo and Ruth spoke on, especially the thing about how the repression continues after so many years of democracy. So this gives us a challenge to go to Ruth's points about charity begins at home. So my question is, what has been happening? What lessons can we learn from the past 25 years or so of the clampdown on social movements since the rise of neoliberalism in the late 90s? You know, and my question to us here all is, what is it that could be done in terms of reviving that spirit of solidarity, that worker solidarity, that working class solidarity, because there seems to have been not just repression as a challenge of the past 30 years, but there's a lot of division and dilution of struggles. So what lessons can be learned from those social movements, like maybe say TAC or APF, or those guys that were causing havoc when Thabo Mbeki was president, and everything changed after the World Summit on Sustainable Development. So I'm just curious to know what lessons people can think we can pick up from those experiences of the social movements in Daba and those kind of things, yeah.
Okay, yes, greeting comrades. My name is Daniel, also from the Labour side. But having had all the speakers speaking so nicely and give us a lot of information that would include you, the facilitator. But my concern or the question I would like to direct to all of you on the podium. Yeah, the question is that I've attended a number of sessions and platforms such as this, but all I'm hearing or all I'm seeing is only people delivering nice messages and nice speeches to us. Okay, we are now much more informed, more than enough. So the concern is that what are actions to be taken post these 30 years that we are speaking about? what is the next step? Because I think we are going to be attending some other sessions such as this, but we can only get the narratives, but no action. So the question or the challenge to you is that what actions are to be taken in order that tomorrow we say, yes, we can see a black child is going to school, a black child is going to bed with a full stomach. Yeah, just that snapshot. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, mine is 2 cents. I'm Kashiva Ahmad from Housing Assembly. I just want to say that thanks, panelists, for your presentation. But I think the democracy, it's not working for us. Have we ever think about the genocide that we are going through? This should lead to a campaign on genocide on us, because housing, health, education, everything is all against us as communities. And I think we need to think about taking the state on. I don't know how, in which form, because it needs to be addressed in a way where social movements, whoever is part of the package, should take this on as a genocide on us as communities. Thank you.
Thanks, comrades. Yeah, my name is Peter Mnete from Abahlali Freedom Park. I think all the speakers, yeah, you spoke very well. You gave us a lot of information, but this is our daily, daily struggle that you spoke about. So, the two comrades, the last two comrades, Comrade Kashifa and Com, they spoke about something. Speak about what to be done, because I think this way has been abused. Like Comrade Ruth was talking about that, these the deputy Leninist and what. We need to have some way of a way forward, because I mean, these issues of the struggle continues. It has been continuing since I don't know, 60s, 40s, the 30s, But we need to come up with something that really, I think Comrade Thapelo spoke about that we need to put our differences aside and have a way forward. And we saw that also what Comrade Ruth was talking about, that, the business of unionism is something else, because now it's about the leadership of the unions. It's no longer even about the workers. And we can't differentiate the struggle of workers from the community struggle and the student struggle also, because the students are the children of the workers and the community, community members. So that's where I think the mistake is, but I am not sure if we will be able to champion that kind of a struggle if we don't hold the leadership into account. I'm actually somehow confused on how can we do that, because these organizations, they have I don't even want to call them by names. As Comrade Princess was talking about the issue of Hammanskraal, we once had a workshop in Pretoria, and they were really fighting to say, no, we can't have a workshop talk about the struggle here while Hammanskraal, there is a burning issue here. And then she was even wanted to be kicked out of that workshop. As we came here, in Freedom Park, since last week, there is one street called Nyanga Street. The sewer there, the main pipe of the sewer, I think about 20 houses. Our storage is blocked, and the pool comes in, even inside the house. In such a way, if you don't even have a plan, now it's a business of, where like the poor exploiting the poor. Because those who are having the tools to unblock that thing, they are so happy. They are taking advantage of that. Seemingly, it's the same thing to this government, the democratic government. Anything that is a problem to the community, for them is another time to loot the money and do everything. So I think coming out from here, we should have some sort of way forward on how can we really maybe have, I don't know, stay away and what. But I think the unions, they are the one in the middle of this.
Thank you so much, comrades. The questions and the comments. Comrade Hameeda, If you can speak about the challenges that are confronting the labor movement today, it can take up to until Friday. So hence I've decided to narrow down my input to concentrate on how do we rebuild, and obviously concentrating on the social justice sector, which is what the trade union belongs. And there's an issue about what is to be done. I think the comrade is talking about what is to be done. And yesterday, Comrade Dinga, when we were in the Hlahloba session, there are 5 issues that he raised in terms of his observation. I would like to raise 2 issues. And the second one, I think it's pertinent in relation to what is to be done. Comrade Dinga, which is point number 4, he spoke about, among other challenges that the social justice sector is confronted with, it's having not been able to build the strong social movement. There's fragmentation, we are weak, we are contesting on resources and stuff like that. And what he actually proposed within a minute, it's a movement building. He said, there's no clarity on the movement building strategy. And then he suggested that there has to be a short-term and a long-term strategies that needs to be adopted in ensuring that we build the movement. So I guess the last day of this exercise, or when we go to the commissions, we need to reflect on that, because of definitely in responding to the second question on how do we reclaim democracy from below, we need to respond to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to be very short, because I think the reviving the solidarity of workers or the working class, or this thing about the next step, I think for me it's going to be one response. I think we must face the elephant in the room. We have been divided by funding. That is a fact. Even if we march together, we want our banners to be seen, because we want to go and report about a march that was not organized by you, you were not part of it, but you want to report about that march. But because we are doing the same things everywhere, wherever we are, because of funding, we were under pressure from funding, and it's no longer us owning the struggle. The struggle is now about reporting. Yeah. So if we can deal with that. Maybe the last thing is that the egos that we have. In the movement where I am, General Secretary doesn't have that much of a power. But there are people who have been General Secretary for life. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is some of the things, and it's happening in the movements and in NGOs as well, is that the money that is being pumped in makes people to be dictators, to remain in positions forever because of the investments that is there. Maybe in closing, 2 minutes. There's a comrade here who once invited me to speak about something that I was not comfortable about. And I think that was the first time we had to grow our movement at that time. He says, I must critically look at things that we are not doing right. Now you are not comfortable to say, when you are a movement that has grown like ours, to speak about the negative things that are happening in the movement. And it was from that time that I realized that there are many things that I need to go back and rectify, because I was able to speak about and be critical about ourselves. And I think it's time for that. So for us as social movement, civil society, to introspect and say, wherever we are not doing right, we go back and rectify that. Thank you.
Comrade Thapelo, it's true, we need to make sure that we end the culture of NGOism. NGOism needs to end, because it is the main problem, the major problem that's killing social movements. Comrade, there you said what needs to be done. We've been picketing, we've been marching, we've been protesting. They don't hear us. So when it comes to unemployment, we need reindustrialization back. We need alternative work which we need to create on our own. We need to demand the 1 million climate jobs due to the fact that we see now that we don't only have, it's not system change, but it's climate change. When on the issue of food security, let's occupy land for farming. We've been occupying land for houses and shacks, and let's occupy land for farming. And make sure that we take back our economy by supplying produce to our own people and also becoming suppliers to the supermarkets that we have, such as your ShopRite, your Pick and Pay, all those. And when it comes to education, simple, let's change the curriculum. Let's go back to students learning needlework, learning handwork, learning gardening, because those skills are skills that they will need in future. Those skills are skills that we should deem, and when our kids matriculate, then we would know that they were learning not locusts and frogs, but they were learning in an institution that taught them the school of life, because those skills, it's what they will need in the future after matriculating, because there are no jobs that are created by the government.
Thank you very much, comrades. So, in ending, I think I want to maybe summarize, the point that you made, or maybe highlight the point that you raised, comrade, in the names of those whose blood was spilled. And I think, let's put ... because I think for every single one of us, we can put hundreds of names. And the question is, was it worth it? Was it worth it? When we look at all those lives, all that blood that was spilled, is this what we have as a democracy? I think the questions that the comrades have posed in relation to where to from here, well, that's why we're here. I don't think it belongs to any single person. It's important that you ask it. It's important that we remember it. And I think throughout the coming days' deliberations, hopefully we will come out with a way forward. Maybe not all of the answers, but begin at least to start deliberating. So thank you very much, and thank you very much to the panelists. That's the end of the first session.
Now, comrades, when we opened, we asked that we're in plenary and there won't be any question and answers. Because the comrades who are sitting here are not the treasure trove of knowledge. We all are. The comrades who are here are the beginning of how we're going to be in conversation with each other. Because if we do plenary, panel discussion, and question and answer, people go back onto their phones because they believe that they don't need to ask questions. So it was to stop that so we all engage in the breakaway sessions. That's why. And now, we're close to 30 minutes late. But it is what it is. So, comrades, we're going to then move on to the next sort of theme-ish around defining the political crisis. How did we get here? So you'll see on the program that you have in your emails, because we're environmental justice activists too. This is why we didn't print it out. You'll see that it's a 3 kind of part of chat. So the first part will be with Noncedo and Dr. Nail Reddy for 30 minutes. And Dr. Nail Reddy is joining us virtually. Then we'll move on to Comrade Ferron and Comrade Gunnett Kaaf. And then after that, we'd move in to Comrade Suraya Jaawoodien and then Comrade William Shoki. So then I'll hand over to Noncedo and Dr. Nail for 30 minutes, and we'll move on like that. Yes, yeah, please put on Comrade Nail. Yeah, we've seen my face enough.
Malwani, comrades. Mandla. Wait, 2? In the 30 minutes, I don't know if we can afford a little bit of a song. Akone pina. Isn't it an socialism? Ezandleni zabantu akuna muntu ophethe umhlaba eyeti ni socialism cima bawo cima wonke tu akuna muntu iza because yeza Hayi. Yini socialism umhlaba wonke esandleni sabantu. Akunamuntu ophethe umhlaba ethu. Ayasababo, ayesaba magwala. Nongqowa ngoba iza ukusetyenzelwa ngabantu ayayesabayo. Okay, Comrade Nail, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to make my prelude short, comrades, because we've got 30 minutes. Ne? I've got a request. Oh, my name is Noncedo Madubedube. I'm a member of the broader movement for social justice. I thought I'd get a bit of a, no, are we not all members of the, don't sleep, this thing is ours, no? But also the General Secretary of the Trade Union of Learners in South Africa, Equal Education. I want to ask if people can do two things for us. The one is that if you do get tired, because the second session is an hour and a half, use the room, drink some water, but try stay in the room. Ne? It's not going to be inappropriate. And the second thing is to just jot down your thoughts. Izolo, we were told that instead of trying to theorize and hypothesize the things that we're hearing, let's think about how they make us feel. So if you hear something that moves you, please write it down. Phakwe breakaway groups, we're going to engage. Is that fine? And then I said two, so I'll leave it there. In this session, we're going to be discussing how exactly did we get here. So this is our theater about the moment, 94, and the rise of a neoliberal hegemony. Yeah? The comrades of education justice are being moored by neoliberal agendas and hegemony. And a brief context to that is that if abantu up in this room are saying, our education system, my leader is out of school early today because of commands. She was supposed to be here at 3. But if there's no water in her school, it means the school community doesn't have water today. If there's no housing lists, the health system is poor and undignified for the majority. And we are inside a social justice sector that we've said ourselves carries no mandate. Leadership is laula. And there are poor internal democratic processes and praxis. And there is no solidarity, really. No solidarity locally, no solidarity regionally. And then we aren't even bringing the global context into your conversations. So how did we get here, and what are we going to do about neoliberal hegemony? The other thing is that yesterday we had another learner here, Yolanda, as a deputy chair of Equal Education, and she said, the frightening thing for her is the fact that government isn't even stirred by mass mobilization anymore. You can be there in your thousands. They'll take the memorandum if they come at all, and they'll continue with business as usual. And so when we're sitting in a dispensation that we can clearly see values, buildings, profit, capital over people, we want to still ask ourselves and answer the question of how did we get here?
All right, I'll try to be quick. So, comrades, I was given the title 1994 and the Rise of Neoliberal Hegemony. Hegemony, by the way, just means something's dominance. So kind of how this ideology of neoliberalism becomes dominant. So very quickly, what I'll try to do is I'll try to give a definition of neoliberalism, and then I'll try to look at the transition in South Africa and understand why we ended up with this neoliberal dominance. And here I'll try to make the argument, comrades, that it wasn't inevitable. There were alternatives to neoliberalism. And in fact, there was one particularly strong alternative which was put forward by the labor movement, a strategy of radical reform. And it's important for us strategically to understand why that alternative got defeated. And then if there's time at the end, I'll talk a little bit about the consequences of neoliberalism, what it's done to our society, and how so many of the social ills we see today, including all of this state failure and corruption and patronage, etc., are very much an outgrowth of the kind of economy and the kind of society that neoliberalism created. So what is neoliberalism? Very briefly, comrades, we can think of neoliberalism as an ideology or a movement that says that society should be governed by the market and by the forces of competition. So everything we decide, how to allocate resources, etc., the market must decide that, and the state must stay out of things generally. It shouldn't involve itself too much in the economy. It shouldn't try to set rules and control things. So this leads to all these kinds of policies like austerity, fiscal discipline, privatization, limit the amount of state enterprises, these kinds of things. Because what's really distinctive about neoliberalism, where you get the neo from, is the political theory. And what the political theory realizes quite openly is actually you need quite a strong state in order to create free, unregulated markets. You need a state that's going to be there to set the ground rules on which markets operate and to protect them from democracy. So neoliberals, the original neoliberal thinkers, were quite aware of the fact that the policies they were promoting were not going to be policies that were generally favored by people. And so they realized there was this inherent hostility between neoliberalism and democracy. And so a big part of their project was essentially trying to insulate the market from the control of states and publics. So like they're trying to take the decisions away from a democratic society and constitutionalize a market control. So you can think of this in terms of, for example, the independence of a central bank. I mean, what is that doing? It's taking away a very important decision that should be made through a democratic process, deciding interest rates which govern the level of economic activity. And it's saying, no, we're going to leave this in private hands so that there's no democratic oversight over this. So you can kind of see very clearly what the class character of neoliberalism is. It's a system that's very much about benefiting big corporations and rich elites. And that's why the neoliberal era has been one of dramatically rising inequality. Of course, neoliberals will not say that. They'll say that they're promoting this ideology because they think it's good for everybody, it makes the economy efficient, etc. But really, it's an ideology that serves the interests of the rich and the powerful. So we have to understand then, how is it that this system became dominant, particularly around 1996 or so? The introduction of GEAR, Growth, Employment and Redistribution Act, is really when the ANC starts to embrace neoliberal ideas, and neoliberal ideas start to form the basis of the new policies and institutions that they're building. All right, just let me know again if I get cut off. Okay, so we have to understand why the ANC makes this reversal, and it goes back on the ideas that it had promoted for most of its history, which was really very much the opposite of neoliberalism. It was a vision in which the state was going to have a big role in the economy, in protecting the weaker members of society, in guiding the way accumulation happens. So the ANC very famously talked about nationalization of the commanding heights of the economy. So all of the big, really important industries were going to be directly controlled by the state. And when Mandela gets out of prison, he makes it sound like this is still very much the commitment of the ANC. He says very famously that nationalization is, I can't remember the word, he said unimpeachable policy or something of the ANC, and it's inconceivable we would ever deviate from this. Then just 5 years later, all of this seems to be going out of the door, and the policies that they're adopting are the ones that are promoted by big capital domestically and by foreign imperialist governments like the US. So we have to understand, why does this happen? And in understanding the capitulation of the ANC to neoliberalism, there's going to be obviously kind of two factors. One is we have to understand the very strong pressures that they came under that tried to convince them that this program of social democracy and redistribution was not going to be viable any longer, pushing them towards an embrace of globalization, of neoliberalism. But then secondly, we have to understand why it seemed that so many of the ANC didn't really put up much of a fight in defense of their ideas of social democracy, that they went over quite quickly and quite easily to an embrace of neoliberalism. So in the first camp, the kind of first big factor is that the moment at which the ANC comes to power is a moment that's very unfavorable towards building this kind of state-centered strategy. So the mid-90s is a point in which neoliberalism is really most ascendant around the world. It's the kind of high point of neoliberalism globally. And the big reason for that is that this is a few years in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. So we have a world system that's dominated by a single major superpower, the USA. At the same time, it's a moment that there's a big takeoff in globalization, real deep integration between economies internationally, spread of global value chains, integration of finance, etc. A lot of this was driven by the technological revolution around ICT. And so it looked to a lot of comrades who were coming in, taking over the state in this new era of democracy. It seemed like it would be that to try to resist globalization was kind of futile, that these things were a sort of force of nature. The game had changed. It was an entirely new era. And the policies that had been advocating nationalization, etc., were policies of a bygone era. It was useless to try to fight against this. At the same time, there were very effective political forces pushing them in this way. And we put a lot of emphasis, it tends to be on international forces, but really the key actor here were domestic actors. It was big business in the country. And they had a lot of resources at their advantage. You know, big business was very centralized. If you remember at this period, it was a period in which there's sort of 5 or 6 companies, these kind of diversified business groups that dominate the entire economy, right? So there's a lot of power in a few hands. They had a very clear idea themselves of the kind of policies they wanted. They were very much advocating neoliberalism because they knew it would give them protections against this new government and its tendency to want to redistribute resources. And the ANC were forced to negotiate with these actors. It was the reality that this group of people, these big businesses, really controlled the economy. They controlled investment, they controlled employment, right? If the ANC was going to fight them, that would have really potentially jeopardized the entire peace process in the country. If the ANC started to say that we're not just asking for democracy, but we're going to start taking away the assets of white elites, then it very likely could have led to a civil war situation. So it meant the ANC was forced to negotiate with these very powerful partners. But it's also true, I think, that there were a lot in the ANC that ended up being not so committed to this vision of redistribution ultimately. And it turned out that they were ultimately quite willing to go along with neoliberalism if it meant that it didn't rock the boat too much and it got it back to a situation where they can start to make money and they can start to enjoy the fruits of this capitalist economy. And the reason for that, I think it's just useful for us to mention that the ANC was not a workers' party. It liked to have this phrase that the weight was always towards the working class in the ANC, but in reality, it was a party of different classes. And in fact, middle class and elite elements by this stage had become very influential in the organization for reasons that we could get into. It had partly to do with the strategies they adopted in the 1980s. And these elements didn't really have an incentive to want to create a big fight with capital and to create all the disruption that would have caused. They were quite willing to go along with the party. So this gives us part of the reason of why we end up with neoliberal hegemony, because the ANC capitulates so quickly. But it's only part of the story because the ANC is not the sole actor here. They're not the sole agent of history. And in fact, they weren't even really the dominant player in the mass democratic movement in a certain sense. Really the kind of vanguard of the movement, in a sense of the actor that had been most critical in bringing apartheid to its knees, was the labor movement, acting very effectively in a coordinated alliance with social movements and with civic structures. But it was this extremely powerful labor movement that had emerged from the late 1970s onwards that had been really the force that brought apartheid to his knees. And as much as the ANC around this time was vacillating about its economic ideas, that was not the case with the labor movement. In fact, the labor movement at this time was developing a very sophisticated proposal for how to build power in the democratic dispensation. And it was the proposal that exercised a lot of weight over the movement as a whole. There was a kind of ideological hegemony in a few of the early years of the transition that COSATU was able to exercise. And it started to develop a strategy that became known as radical reform, that would have been a comprehensive alternative to the neoliberalism that the ANC ultimately promoted. So what is radical reform? Radical reform broadly was a democratic socialist strategy, democratic in the sense that it tried to work within the constitutional order, within capitalism. It wasn't trying to cause some new revolution, some insurrection. It was a strategy that was about working through the parliament, through the constitution, to take state power and then use that power to gradually transform the structure of the economy such that you're shifting power away from capital and towards labor. You're changing gradually the balance of class forces. And how was that to be done? through kind of two main pillars. One of it was a transformation in the economic structure, the composition of output of the economy, where employment is centered, etc. So what was it that had brought the labor movement into being in the 70s and 80s? It was this massive process of industrialization. It was all of this employment that was getting created in manufacturing industries that concentrated workers together in dense urban settings that were relatively easy to organize, and that meant workers could exercise a lot of leverage. When they shut down factories, when they cut off the spigot of profits in these big urban centers, they were able to deal a serious blow to capital. So labor understood that this structure of the economy in which employment gets concentrated in manufacturing was good for them. It meant that the more that you can expand industrialization, manufacturing industries, etc., the bigger you can make the labor movement, the more people you can bring organized unions. So part of what they were trying to do was use the state to guide a strategy of building industries. The other thing they were trying to do is change all of the rules and the institutions and the policies of the state in various ways that are going to make labor stronger. So you're going to roll out strong welfare programs. You're going to give people subsidized housing and healthcare, all of these kinds of things that mean that they're less dependent just on the market for their survival. When they get fired by their boss, they have this social safety net to fall back on. That means it enhances their bargaining power. It makes labor relatively stronger relative to capital. So this was the strategy. You use state power to enact this vision of transformation where the economy gradually strengthens the hand of labor. And every time labor gets stronger, you renegotiate the bargain with capital in a way that shifts more and more power to the popular movements until you eventually lay out a road for socialism. Now, this wasn't only good politics, it was also very good economics, because it took very seriously the lesson of history from development, which tells us that late developing peripheral countries like South Africa don't really manage to change their situation in the global system unless the state gets involved to help these countries to expand and to upgrade their production system. If they try to do what the neoliberals were saying, you leave everything to these free markets, they're going to be competing against industries in these rich capitalist nations that are much more technologically sophisticated, and they're going to get decimated. So what's the result of that going to be is they're going to end up just specializing in the things that peripheral countries always did, sending resources, cheap agricultural goods, to rich nations and not getting very much in return of it, not being able to develop their economies. So this vision of radical reform took seriously the idea that if this country is going to upgrade, if it's going to become a rich industrialized country, then it has to have the state protecting and guiding industries so that we can unfold this process of development. So it was a good strategy in many terms. Why did this strategy lose? I think the answer has only partly been written. There's a lot of work that has focused on a different process of co-optation that happened in the labor movement around this time, in which many key leaders of the labor movement were suddenly absorbed into the state, and to some extent even into the private sector. They were taking up positions in the cabinet, in the parliament, in the civil service, and sometimes even in the human resources departments of companies. This was partly an effect of policies that COSATU itself had adopted, where they'd chosen to blur the organizational boundaries between the labor movement and the ANC. And so they were deploying their own cadres into the ANC, encouraging them to take up these positions. And inevitably, it meant that these leaders very quickly were no longer really able to represent the interests of workers. Instead, they were just representing the interests of the state and even of employers in many cases. So there was a process of co-optation that meant that COSATU had this very effective strategy for how to change things that never really defended that strategy fully in the end. I think ultimately this is only part of the story. And I think that there's another element to which COSATU was actually defeated in a power struggle around this time. And the way this unfolded was that a number of key battles were lost very early on in the fight against neoliberalism. So neoliberal policies got implemented very quickly. And as soon as they got implemented, it started to reshape the terrain on which these struggles were being fought. And labor started to lose its advantages very quickly. And what that meant is labor started to get disoriented. They couldn't figure out a way to advance the strategy. And so radical reform ultimately gets abandoned. The labor movement shifts implicitly. It's not, they don't say this is what they're doing, but they start to adopt a different kind of strategy, where effectively they give up on any attempt to mobilize assertively around a different economic vision. And instead, they demand a few key concessions from the ANC. So it's the ANC shifts broadly towards this neoliberal project, but it concedes on a couple of major spheres. The key first one being labor regulation. It introduces certain quite protective rules around hiring and firing, protection for unions, etc. That's key to allow unions to continue to organize. And then secondly, it shifts a little bit on welfare policy. It doesn't follow the neoliberal playbook that says that you should just leave everything up to the market on welfare. Instead, it creates something of a robust welfare state. It's not perfect. It's not what we would have wanted it to have been, but it was not nothing. And the backbone of this, of course, was the social grant system. The ANC is distributing a lot of money through cash grants to the old age and the childcare grant in particular. And so we get this kind of uneven neoliberalism where the ANC adopts a whole bunch of other policies that are very characteristic of a neoliberal program: independent central bank, liberalized financial markets, free trade. It removes tariffs on things. It dropped a lot of privatization, not fully because it wanted to still control certain state-owned enterprises because it was useful for creating elite accumulation. But it adopts broadly neoliberalism with these two big concessions around labor regulation and around welfare. And what is the effect of this? Basically, the critique that radical reform had of neoliberal policies entirely is realized. It entirely comes true that these neoliberal policies have the effect of distorting the economic structure. It means that our manufacturing, our industries start to get wiped out. The economy overwhelmingly becomes dependent again on mining exports in order to generate income. And most of the new growth in jobs that occurs is in highly precarious service sectors where it's much harder to organize. On top of this, you have then these welfare policies that provide some kind of safety net and provide some basis for unions to continue to organize. And this is key to the ANC's ability to maintain its legitimacy despite the neoliberal policies that it's adopted, because it is still able to affect meaningful material improvements to the lives of a large number of South Africans. It's providing subsidized housing, it's providing these cash grants, it's providing public health care, it's doing things that do make meaningful improvements, but it's not ultimately changing the structure of the economy. And so the whole theory of power that radical reform had relied on, that you start to change the structure in a way that labor starts to get more powerful, the reverse starts to happen under neoliberalism. The kinds of sectors where labor had been really strong, where it was easy to organize, where they had lots of leverage, these sectors start to get undermined, employment reduces over there, labor's structural power gets eroded, right? And so you can see why the bargain that labor strikes, where it asked for these protective labor policies, but it gives up on any attempt to try to govern the direction of the economy as a whole, is ultimately a very self-defeating one. It ends up in a situation where it's holding on to scraps, but it's losing the much bigger battle because the direction of the economy, direction of accumulation is now shifting in a way that over the long term, labor power is gradually being eroded. The other big effect of this is that it starts to...
Sorry, hold on now. You've got 4 minutes left, no? So think about how you're going to just wrap that up for us. Sounding good.
4 minutes, okay, that's perfect. That's plenty of time. I'm going to wrap this up just by talking about one of the other big consequences of neoliberalism, which is that ultimately it becomes the seedbed for these giant systems of patronage that spread throughout the economy, and which gives rise ultimately to the era of state capture and all of the disasters that created. And why is this so? Because one of the effects of neoliberalism, remember, is that it limits growth, and particularly it limits growth in new industries. And so it means that all of these aspirant Black capitalists who are, keen to use the democratic era to finally take advantage of all of the economic opportunities they've been excluded from for decades under neoliberalism, have very limited avenues for growth in the private economy. It's very hard if you're a new capitalist trying to set up in the democratic era. It's very difficult for that to happen because the economy is so stagnant and still so dominated by these historic white conglomerates. So what do they end up doing? They turn their attention to the state. They start to demand that the state helps them to accumulate. And this becomes the basis for tenderpreneurialism, for what some people call the contract state, that the ANC is the state is essentially outsourcing all of its functions as a way of basically providing contracts and providing a basis for accumulation for this capitalist class that then becomes the kind of social basis for entrepreneurialism and for patronage. At the same time, it also means that because the stagnant economy is unable to create enough jobs, it cannot absorb the big surpluses of labor that had been contained in the Bantustans. More and more people are dependent entirely on grants and other forms of welfare in order to make a living. And so they themselves get deeply rooted in these kinds of patronage systems. Now, this is very important for us, comrades, because a big capital is in many ways very opposed to state capture and to radical economic transformation, right? And they often tend to draw this distinction between neoliberalism, which they associate with clean governance, and state capture. But the reality is that these two systems are very much intertwined. Part of the whole reason we get state capture and we get the rise of this form of populism rooted in patronage is because of the neoliberal economy and the fact that it created so limited means for people to earn legitimate livelihoods. And so this tells us, comrades, if we want to escape from this quagmire that we're in at the moment, where we have this failing state that's unable to provide resources, that's totally mired in corruption, etc., it's not enough for us just to clean up the state itself and to tackle corruption and to have a more effective prosecuting authority, etc. We also need to change the underlying growth model such that we change the social conditions under which patronage and corruption is taking root. And that means ultimately challenging neoliberalism. So let me leave it there. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you very much, Com. While Ferron makes her way up, please, for the next part of the session, what you're saying to us is that this isn't just a force of nature. Yeah? It's a socioeconomic construct. It's deliberate, and there are ways that now we can build tools to resist and inform anew what he calls a growth model. The brothers that are involved in the system, I'm hoping that Ferron's coming up. Ne? I'm trying to do filler times. Is the idea of power in the story here. Political power, so building of the political elite who are in fact co-conspirators of capital. The idea of policy, Gia-esque, that's where it all started, and those policies are evolving and they are consolidating. Our governments are choosing to privatize social goods, and that leaves the most vulnerable even more. And the idea of the weakened labor movement, how that was co-opted. And then maybe last is the farce of a Dintswalo. And that's how we moved between 94 and where we are today. Thank you, comrades, for your attention. No? Let's keep it moving.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Hi. My name is Pedro. I am a senior campaigner at 350africa.org, which is a climate justice organization. And the focus of our organization is linked to this discussion, really, because we're interested in helping to build mass movements powerful enough to be able to challenge fossil fuel capital. Am I doing okay with the mic? Okay. Resist green neocolonialism and transform our economic systems for people and planet, not profit. And this requires enormous power from working class movements. And so I'm very interested in how we got here and what can we do differently. And I'm joined by Comrade Gunnett Kaaf. Gunnett is a Marxist activist, writer, and fiscal policy research manager in the Free State Provincial Treasury. He has previously held leadership positions in the South African Communist Party Free State and the Young Communist League of South Africa until he left the Young Communist League in 2006 and the SACP in 2013. He has since written critically on the SACP's alliance with the ANC, describing the South African Communist Party as, quote, thoroughly implicated in the collapsing state, the cronyism and the corruption, the austerity and capitalist domination of society. So that was an article in 2021, co-authored with Comrade Mazibuko Jaha, 3 years later, the South African Communist Party are still in alliance with the ANC, who are now in alliance, or supposedly government of national unity, with the DA, a party that openly calls for the end of the minimum wage and is explicitly committed to a neoliberal program. So your criticism has shown to be more and more correct as the contradictions in the tripartite alliance remain. Can you talk us through how you came to understand the contradictions in the alliance as a member? And what lessons can anti-capitalist movements learn from what you've come to understand?
Thank you. Amanda, go ahead too. Thank you, comrades, for this opportunity. I'll try to be brief. It's a fairly a vast topic. And it's good we started with Nail on the hegemony of neoliberalism since 1994. So that the three basic questions that I want to address are very much, the first one is related with the topic that Nail was discussing. So in going through the contradictions in the alliance, I want to talk about the political strategy of the alliance and why it failed to effect a meaningful social transformation and a sovereign development project over the last 30 years. The second question will be the socialist tendency within the alliance and why it has been weak to impact the alliance towards a radical direction. The third question is the alliance with regards to social movements and other left forces. Why a historical bloc of social movements, mass movements, the left outside the ANC, something as big as the UDF in the 80s. Why such a bloc could not crystallize over the last 30 years. But then there are other three questions that I wanted to entertain, but because of time I can't. So I'll just mention them so that we reflect on them in our discussions. So the first question is, why did the ANC dominate for 30 years despite its gross failures? Why did it dominate for 30 years without a challenge, despite its gross failures to change South Africa into a better country? The second one is, why, out of the last election, clearly the biggest winner there is the DA. Remember, the DA is the offspring of the Democratic Party, which was a liberal party going into 1994, led by Zach de Beer. They had 7 MPs in the 1994 parliament, but they were very loud because the National Party, which had 20% of the vote and maybe 80% MPs, had joined Mandela's government of national unity, the real government of national unity that was written down in the interim constitution to say all parties that have 20% of the vote, 5% of the vote will be invited to join the GNU. A party that has 20% of the vote will be given a deputy president. So which is why in 1994, we had 2 deputy presidents, de Klerk and Thabo Mbeki, because a National Party had 20% of the vote. So they qualified to get the deputy. And now you also had IFP, that was part of the government of national unity. The performance of the PAC was very bad in that election. I think they got 5 MPs. I was shocked. Azapo boycotted the 1994 elections, saying it's a sellout election. So they were not there. But when they participated in the next election, 1999, they got 1 seat or 2 seats. So I don't know who was selling out. And then, so that would be my second question. Why? So the DA then grew. I digress. The DA then grew, consistently from the 7 MPs they had then to the 87 MPs they have today. So first, in the next election, 1999, the DA gets into an alliance with the National Party. The National Party left GNU in 1996, realizing that they are not able to champion the wide interest. The Democratic Party is leading in that space. So they left the government of national unity. So then they negotiated a deal to form a democratic alliance. So initially the Democratic Alliance was the alliance between the National Party and the Nationalist Party. Now then, towards the election, the deal did not come to pass. They disagreed on many things. So then they contested as National Party and DP. DP in parliament was DP, but in public, they retained the name Democratic Alliance. Their manifesto in the 1999 elections was fight back. The ANC comrades even ridicule them to say they are saying fight black. So, but then that message resonated with the white community and the colored community, which the National Party had failed to continue to represent, because the National Party was the party of apartheid. Now, 1994 was the moment of breaking with apartheid. So then they still wanted white people to have veto, and they could not succeed to have that inside GNU. So then 1999 elections, the National Party reduces drastically in its support. The DA grows, with the name DP. In the next election, the National Party had now been swallowed by the ANC, even though they contested, but they declined significantly. They continued to decline. The DP, now officially using the name DA in parliament, grew. And when Zille took over, he said one thing that was big. He said, DA will never lead this country for as long as it is not led by a white leader. So after she was elected, she said that I'm the last white leader of DA in 2007. So then they started recruiting black leaders. Musi came a little bit later. There was a lady, I can't remember her name. No, before Van Dam. Lindiwe Mazibuko. And there was that guy who used to be in the PAC. He was national chair or something. I'll remember his name. It's a Setswana name. He was in the DA. He was big. So I remember, do you remember when Kgalema became president? There was an election. So DA put the name of that guy to contest Kgalema. After Pulukwan, Josie Reman. Yeah. So there were guys like Josie Reman. Josie Reman was there. He was historically from PAC. They even went to recruit and pet. I can't remember in which election. Patricia Dilile. Maybe 2009. I remember that big poster with 2 black leaders. And yes. So you can see, and then until my man. But when my man took over, my man did not give the DA what it thought they would get, meaning remaining liberal and white controlled. So liberalism does exactly the things that Comrade Nell was talking about. It does not advance popular interest. So then it could not deliver on the interest of the black majority. So so in the next election, after he had been elected, my money, the DA declined slightly. It didn't grow. I think that was 2019. He He was elected 2014, 2019. The DA did not get the votes that they had hoped for. So they were not happy with him. They kicked him out. So DA went back to being white, you know. And Zila now said it openly. You can Google this one. It's there on the internet. The only thing I regret is promoting a black leader for the DA. She said it. So this is what we're discussing with Mazibuko the other day, to say, how do you explain this? An overtly white, so DA has gone back to being white now. They no longer pretend to be a non-racial party. So we're saying, how does an overtly white liberal party get 22% of the vote, or is it 21? You know, in a country that is 85% black. How do you explain that? We don't even have 5 million white people in South Africa, comrades. We don't have them. You know, we have, 75 or whatever million of blacks and colors and Indians. White people are still very few, but they are part. And during the elections, Steinhuisen said it openly. You can Google that one as well. He said, we are happy that we retained our constituency and still expanded, in the communities. He said it. So he was saying, we're happy we retained, because now, unlike what happened in 2019, DA did not lose to Freedom Front. They won the white vote, and still got some significant black vote. So this is a topic that I had initially thought I'll just highlight it, but I realize now it's interesting because I think it is less understood. And it has something to do with the contradictions of the alliance. Now, after 1994, so going into 1994, which would be about why the ANC continued to dominate. We had AZAPO, PAC, ANC. Unity movement had sort of weakened significantly. So those were the three main liberation movements. They were having different viewpoints on how to handle negotiations. So ANC sort of outsmarted these two and went to negotiate with the National Party, and even outsmarted the National Party in many respects. So the ANC emerged as with 62% of the vote. Like I said initially, PAC became very weak. So the two dominant traditions of Africanism and black consciousness became very weak in the early stages of 1994 and most of after post-1994 period. So what didn't happen is that, as Comrade Nail said, when the working class leadership in the ANC was co-opted to government and corporate positions, the working class in the alliance was weakened. COSATU and the Communist Party, civics, the youth and the student movement, and the women's movement, they were weakened. So it was not a foregone conclusion that the ANC was going to go the neoliberal route. The ANC could have still gone a radical route had these mass movements in the ANC fought to challenge the ANC. There have been times during the negotiations where the Youth League of Peter Mokaba challenged the NEC of the ANC when they issued the power sharing paper. I remember Peter Mokaba was in the Youth League. Slovo is a soldier. We will not listen to him. So I remember all the NEC members of the Youth League were rounded across the country to be called to a meeting at Lutulu House, and Tatisusulu say, talking to them like kids, why are you resisting the inevitable? So then there were moments when they were challenged within. Even when Kia came about, COSATU was very strong. SSCP was not very strong. And then SSCP and COSATU, they get swallowed in a big way into the ANC. during leading to Polokwane and after Polokwane. And after Polokwane, how much time do I have? Because I'm like, okay, 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 the coup. So, so then leading to Polokwane, and they create a fake rhetoric, which is what I was going to talk about initially, the political strategy of the ANC. I was going to say the political strategy of the ANC or of the alliance is talk left, walk right. And they master that very well. You know, I mean, Thabo Mbeki had those things of his, those Friday letters. He would quote Lenin there, you know, few but better. Better few but better, something like that. And then he would start. In the 1920s, there was a big debate in the international. There was a comrade, Grigory Zenoviv. I can't remember this comrade who led the international for a very long time, the Third International. He came from Ukraine, if I'm not wrong. And he would give a long citation of what this comrade said. And then would be reading, yes, yes, yes. You hear this thing that this comrade is saying here is socialist and radical. And then he will not, after that quote, he will not say what is then to be done. Now that here in South Africa, they are going right, you know. I mean, just yesterday, the ANC, not the Communist Party, met with the Vietnamese Communist Party. You know, the ANC, every year they go to China, you know, to meet with the Communist Party. They are very close with the Chinese, with the Cuban, what do you call, Communist Party. So the NDR, as Nail was saying, has a false rhetoric of the working class, you know, to say the main content of the struggle is to advance the interests of the historically oppressed with a very strong bias of the working class. But they will never show any empirical evidence in terms of the policies they implement in government, except for the social grants, you know, but with regards to really making sure that they intervene in the economy on behalf of the working class, they don't do that. So then they do that. Now, the main socialist tendencies, obviously, is the Communist Party and COSATU. I think they were defeated because of how much they are immersed in the ANC tradition. I mean, there's very difference between... Communist Party has never had an independent socialist program, you know. Before 1994, the NDR actually was mainly authored by the Communist Party, you know, to say it will generate a momentum towards a socialist struggle. But you never get to know when is this momentum reaching a ripe moment now to say, let's have a socialist challenge, you know? No. Instead, you'll get formulations that says, no, we are not adventurist. So we neither go with the ultra-left or with the conservatives. We are a disciplined force of the left, you know? So then the Communist Party got absorbed in all of that because they had no independent socialist program. COSATU, to its credit, better than the Communist Party, most of the time until Polokwane, it was able to put up serious fights. I mean, COSATU was even allied with social movements outside the ANC, the TAC. COSATU was allied with them. Actually, one of the biggest battles that social movements won after 1994 was the AIDS battle. I mean, the ANC was resisting, and TAC played a big role, you know. So COSATU was close with them, but until the Polokwane moment, where they were completely co-opted now, and all independence that they had was lost into the ANC. And that's how later then, as Comrade Ruth was saying, NUMSA gets expelled. It's because ANC was being defended at all costs. So then, the last point, which relates to the point that Princess said, to say the ANC has been the dominant force in South Africa for 30 years, despite its gross failures. Jaha, the other day, he asked us in a group to say, one editor asked him to say, with all of these failures, some of them are treasonous crimes. You know, the things that comrades were recounting here. Why have forces on the ground failed to organize? Why has the left failed to pose a challenge to the ANC? So like I said, the biggest winner over the last 30 years is the DA. The second biggest winner is still the ANC through MK. You know, the right-wing split of the ANC, actually. They call themselves left, progressive, but they are right-wing, you know. So that's just, and you can see, if it was not of the MK party, ANC would have probably just lost just below 50, not up to 40, because nationally, MK got 14% or 14 point something percent, close to 15, you know. So you can see most of the votes of the ANC went to MK. So I'm having a debate with one comrade of the SSCP in Gauteng, the provincial chair. I say, actually, the strength of MK is the decisive strength, is Zuma's popularity in the ANC, not the Zulu nationalism. Yes, they have Zulu nationalism, but Zulu nationalism was not the decisive point on which they won, because if that was the case, they would have eaten up the constituency of IFP. IFP is the only party in South Africa that is overtly a Zulu nationalist, you know, but they did not grow, and you can see Zuma did not eat on their constituency. He clearly taken from the ANC. So it is Zuma's popularity within the ANC. So that's the crisis of this country, that the crisis of the ANC has become equivalent to the crisis in the country itself. If there's something big that is bad that is happening, it always has the ANC. Remember when Zuma was going to be arrested in 2021, you know, the July unrest broke out. So you can see factions in the ANC were reaching a point of kill or get killed. And Zuma calculated it that they remain dominant. Then he formed the MK party. So then that's the challenge to us here, to say, for as long as the ANC dominates in this country, we will move from one crisis to the next. I mean, we have a president who's facing a pala story. Just that he's liked by the mainstream media. But I mean, clearly pala, you can see. That's a crime of like real criminals, that one. It's not a crime of politicians. So much cash that he can't explain where it comes from. But it shows how dominant the ANC is. And now they raise the Shoki thing as if, no, this thing is so anti-democratic. How can he come into parliament? Precisely, even the Shoki thing is part of the ANC crisis. So for as long as we're not able to transcend the ANC crisis, we're always going to move from one of these big crises into the next. And I hope the next session that is coming is going to deliberate on how do we build movements from below to pose a serious political challenge. Amandla.
We've got 7 minutes left, so I will ask you, They said there's no Q&A. I don't know if that means like from the panelists or from, I can talk, okay. so I have a question. Thank you so much for that contribution. And I mean, for me, the main point or the lesson that I'm thinking, like, what can I learn from this for movements, for building new movements, for reviving the left movements? And the one thing that stood out was an independent socialist program that the SSUP is missing. And I wanted to know, why do you think that was, that, you know, that an independent working class communist program wasn't able to emerge as something that could win over the imagination of most people in the ANC? Do you have thoughts on that? Oh,
Where is Jack? So, so I was in the National Committee of the Young Communist League with Jaha. So I was not at the meeting where he was expelled, but I was in preceding meeting. So he wrote a paper to say, what is the color of the Communist Party? Is it Zuma or red? And he was expelled for that. So that's how immersed the Communist Party, you know, was lost in ANC politics, you know. And in less than 10 years, or 10 years later, around 2017, the Communist Party was where Chaha was in 2006. So the Communist Party was saying, no, there's a Guptarization of the country. Zuma is wrong, what? You remember when Solu was talking a lot, when they had that vote of no confidence in parliament. And yet, they have never come out clean about the crimes they committed on the road to Pulukwan and after Pulukwan, you know. But like I'm saying, that is because they never had an independent socialist program. Why they never had an independent socialist program? It's because they were ANC. So remember, the Communist Party was banned in 1950. And then it operated underground. It resuscitated itself around 1953 or somewhere there. And when the ANC realized in the late 50s that it was going to be banned, it was the Communist Party that was the main machinery of the ANC. So Soli likes this thing. Actually, MK was a joint project of both the ANC and Communist Party. It's true. Even that house where they were arrested, it's a Communist Party house. You know, I think the Boers did not know that. If they knew that, they would have said, no, you guys are worse. Actually, there was another trial of Mandela, where Mandela said, I'm a black man in a white man's court. One of the charges against Mandela was that he's a communist. So Mandela did join the Communist Party as well. So all of those Rivonia trialists were in the Communist Party. Some other time in 2004, thereabout, I was writing some paper, doing some research. Then I called, and in the ANC, they don't say that they are communist. Yeah, no, even Zuma was in the Communist Party, but he'll never say it. Even Thabo Mbeki was in the Central Politburo, but he will never say it publicly. I don't know, even Pravin, you know. But at least Pravin, we know it was now 98. But Thabo Mbeki has never said it, that I was in the Politburo, I chaired an entire conference of the Communist Party, 1989, the one that wrote The Path to Power. You know, I remember the opening line in that document said, the world is moving from, the revolutionary process in the world is from a capitalist system to a socialist system. And by that time, the Soviet bloc was busy falling, you know. So I guess even their socialist program was propagandist than really being on the ground. So that's why it never found an independent footing on its own, you know. So it was always linked with the ANC. And even now, Soli, with his talk, he shows the contradiction of this Communist Party tendency. He says the ANC has gone into bed with a neoliberal party that is overtly neoliberal. But he doesn't say it that actually the ANC was punished by the voters because of the neoliberal development outcomes that produce high poverty, that produce high unemployment, that produce inequality. So he doesn't say those things. So that's the Communist Party. Sorry.
Thank you so much for those insights. And I think I forgot to explain that this is a session on the contradictions of the Tripartite Alliance. Sorry about that. But yeah, no, we got a lot out of that, some insights into how the history of how we got here, and the decisions that were made. And what is very hopeful for me is that none of these are foregone conclusions, natural parts of history. These are people making decisions. We are people making decisions. We can build movements. We can create a program that reflects what we really want, and that is possible. And yeah, nothing is inevitable. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to the next facilitator and panelist.
Emily wanted to provoke Gunnett. It will happen in the breakaway. Yes, in the breakaway, Ma'am Emily. In the breakaway. Yeah. Comrades will come to a conference and say, we are just sitting in at our desks. No one is engaging us. We don't have time to engage. And then my vote counts creates time to engage. You're like, no, want to sit at the desk. You want to sit at the desk and never engage. It's interesting. Cognizant dissonance. Yeah, the sector special. All right, folks, we're going to take a 10-minute comfort break. So, yes, Comrade Moses, in you we trust. The comfort break is for Comrade Moses and all the NG smokers. They know who they are. You literally have 10 minutes. It is right now, 4 o'clock. We need every single human being back in this room at 4:10 because we're going to have the robustest input of the afternoon, actually. So if you disappear, you have no knowledge afterwards. See you at 4:10, comes. Azaneya, Azaneya. In Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar. Azania, Israel, Azaneya, 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 Azaneya. Tange. Right? Mom Zandida, this is why we haven't taken any of the land. That's why we haven't taken any of the land. That's why we are not getting land. Comrades are not on time and comrades are not singing. Ne comrade Ntika. Ne, you're right, ne. This is why we don't have land. Yeah, Asina Luva Lo. Asina Luva Lo Ngalente Sienza. Asina Luvalo. Asina Luvalo. Asina Luvalo. Alente siye. Uvalo valo dalolo. Valo valo dalolo. Sienza yo. Luvalo, alento sienza. Yay! 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 Asina luvalo. Asina luvalo. Alento sienza. Okay. All right. Amanda! Amanda! Yeah, Amanda! Amanda! All right. Ngenkani comrades andile. Nes comrades what? Ngenkani ngeshova ne. That's right. Say that. Uncle show Ma'am Emily maybe next week ne. Not today. No, you know why, Ma'am Emily. Let me not say it out loud. Ngihlupha abantu. I'm scratching people. So I'm going to hand over to. Hi, Comrade Fatima. I'm going to hand over to Comrade Suraya and Comrade William for the final input of the day. I hope we're energized enough and those who are smoking cigarettes are fresh like William.
Okay, comrades, can we settle down? Amandla. No, comrades, you're trying to build movements with your arms folded. I'm going to try and greet again. Amandla. All power. All power. Okay, I think we're together now. We've got the unfortunate situation of where Comrade William has been allocated what's normally called the graveyard session. But I trust that you'll allow him to conclude the debate on what we started discussing as defining the political crisis. How did we get here? We've heard from Comrade Nail, we've heard from Comrade Gunnett. Comrade William is going to help us think through some of the demobilization of the South African society, given that comrades have been alluding to the issue of how did we get to this point. So let's hand over to Comrade Gunnett. Comrade William. You can see I'm in the graveyard session. And we'll take it from there. Comrade William, let's keep within our 30-minute slot before Comrade Kia starts scolding us. All right.
Thank you, Comrade Suraya, and Comrade Gunnett is more than welcome to come up and say more because I think he still had a lot of things to say. So, comrades, thank you for indulging me, and thank you to Gunnett and to Nail and to Thapelo, Princess, and Ruth beforehand, who I think laid the foundations of what I'm going to speak about now, which in fact is not really to present a novel contribution per se, but maybe to try and tie together some things that I think a lot of comrades have thought about, have spoken about, have written about, and to deliver these as a set of provocations that can perhaps frame some of the questions that we will interrogate in the sessions to come after this. So what I'm here to speak about very briefly is the demobilization of South African society. And when we talk about demobilization, what exactly do we mean? And here, I think it's useful to think about two interrelated puzzles that I think have defined the way people on the left and progressives have thought about South African social and political life after apartheid. The first one is something you hear very often, and it's this question along the lines of, how come it is the case that during the anti-apartheid struggle, we had this period of heightened mobilization, heightened consciousness, and intense political activity, but all of that has evaporated so quickly in the post-apartheid era. This is something that people ask repeatedly. I hear it very often. I heard it a number of times today as well. And the second question, which is related to that, and that has come up in this session as well, is how has the power of the ANC endured for so long? How come the ANC has been so resilient despite their numerous failings, despite the ways in which millions of South Africans are dissatisfied and unhappy with their performance in the post-apartheid period? And when we talk about demobilization, I think demobilization is a helpful framework to understand how these two things have happened. So what I'm going to do very briefly today is I'm first going to talk about what exactly we mean by demobilization and how I think that's happened. In talking about how I think that's happened, I'm going to talk about, number one, the reorganization of South African capitalism. A lot of that work to understand that has already been laid out by Nail in his input and by Gunnett in his input as well. And then the second thing I'm going to talk about is how the ANC has adopted a program of passive revolution. And I'm going to explain what passive revolution means and how that illuminates the ways in which South African society has become demobilized. And as a consequence, we still have no real political alternative to the ANC. And then towards the end, I'm going to talk very briefly about what the consequences are for radicals, progressives, leftists in trying to organize for that political alternative. So to first talk about demobilization, I think we can only really understand what demobilization means when we understand it in relation to democracy. And the important thing to clarify when talking about democracy, I wasn't here for the movement caucus yesterday, but the democracy that we're reflecting on, the 30 years of democracy that we're talking about, is 30 years of capitalist neoliberal democracy, right? It's not a democracy that represents what democracy could be. It doesn't exhaust all of the possibilities that it represents. It's a very specific kind of representative democracy. And in their discussions earlier, comrades have outlined exactly what that democracy looks like and what it means. But be that as it may, even in the very limited, the very stifling neoliberal capitalist democracy that we still have, our democracy isn't just going to the polls every 5 years and electing our political representatives, or at least it shouldn't be. In other parts of the world, which are also representative democratic systems, democracy doesn't normally just mean voting in elections. It's come to mean that, but it shouldn't, because it's also about what happens between those elections. At elections, we choose our political representatives, but between those elections, we put pressure on our political representatives to deliver the kind of social, political, and economic programs that we want. How do we do that? We do that through organized political action, right? We get together in trade unions, in social movements, in civic organizations, in schools, in workplaces, in neighborhoods, in all manner of ways to, number one, gather together, articulate, understand our grievances, develop our sense of interests. What do we want from society? How do we think it's failing us? And to finally organize to pursue those ends through collective action. This is normally what happens between those elections. Now, when we talk about demobilization, what we say is that those mediating institutions, those intermediary organizations which offer an arena for people to engage and participate in politics, those institutions are in decline. Less people are participating in them, less people are interested in them, and they've come to be less socially significant in shaping political life. This is a process that is not only unfolding here in South Africa, but it's unfolding all across the world. Union densification is at historic lows. Political party membership is at historic lows. Church memberships are at historic lows, depending on what constitutes a church membership and what church you're talking about. People aren't really organizing anymore. We are, in this room, many of us are, but these organizations no longer have the mass quality that they ordinarily would. The mass quality that when we romanticize, for example, the anti-apartheid period, we thought they once had. So the question then becomes, how come it's become the case that this critical infrastructure of democracy, which is supposed to be an arena and site of political contestation, how come they're no longer that relevant? How come they're no longer as powerful as they once were? And this is what demobilization aims to capture as an analytical and conceptual framework. So in the South African context, the first important reason why that's the case is the way that South African capitalism has been reorganized. Niall spoke earlier about how the economic program that the South African government adopted post-1994 was one of neoliberalism. And neoliberalism meant deindustrialization. It meant the decimation of our country's manufacturing sector. And as a result, it meant the weakness and decline of the trade union movement. Because if you don't have sites of production where people can be concentrated, they're all under one roof, and they can all organize fairly easily, it's very hard to organize a trade union and to organize it successfully. The transformation of the economy away from industrialized sectors of production to more precarious sectors of production, the growth of the services sector, for example, has meant that the labor movement as a social force in the country has started to decrease in significance. And the reason for that is fairly obvious, right? Part of the problem, for example, of organizing in a precarious economy is the fact that the nature of that labor is precarious, right? It's not guaranteed that people will be convened under one roof, where they will be exposed to each other on a day-to-day basis, where by being exposed to each other on a day-to-day basis, they develop a common set of grievances, where as they develop a common set of grievances, they then start to develop a sense of how they can overcome those grievances. When the makeup of labor in society is informalized, when it's made more precarious, it means that labor is typically performed in a very isolated and atomized fashion. It's very difficult for people to develop solidarity in those circumstances, is the one reason. The second reason is the nature of the labor itself, because it's insecure. When employment is relatively more secure, then it's relatively easier to engage in collective action. Because collective action means undertaking enormous risks. The first risk, obviously, is a risk to your employment, because you are taking time away from your employment to devote it to other activities. The fact that you are doing this often under the watchful eye of an employer only compounds the risks that employment or engaging in collective action involves. And so when you have an economy where the very nature of the labor that is performed by the majority, first of all, we haven't even spoken about the fact that we have an economy where the majority of people are unemployed, notwithstanding the fact that they're precariously employed, it means it's very difficult for people to organize. And on the other hand, if it's an informalized economy, if it's an economy with such high rates of joblessness as ours is, then it's very difficult to organize people in the first place, because people who lack jobs, who lack a place where they are collectively gathered, aren't furnished with a natural place to meet, aren't furnished with a natural set of things to organize over. So the decline of the trade union movement has probably had the most significant impact in South Africa in demobilization, because now the trade union movement, and there's lots of other reasons for the decline of the trade union movement, some were mentioned earlier, some more subjective factors, but this is an objective factor, which means that in the first place, set aside the people who are doing the organizing, their own maybe character defects or whatever, set aside all of those issues. The very fact of organizing people to exercise leverage over capitalists is very difficult. So that's one significant factor for the demobilization of South African society, is that declining rates of employment and declining rates of union membership means that the marginalized are without an important tool of exercising leverage in society, that tool being withholding their employment. I'm not going to elaborate on this anymore because I think it was covered pretty well by Niall and Gunnett. So I want to move on to the second reason for the demobilization of South African society. And this is just as significant. So one recurring question that's come out today, as I mentioned at the beginning, is this one of how is it that the ANC has remained so resilient despite its enormous failures? And the reason for that, one significant reason for that, is that the ANC has pursued a program of passive revolution. What does passive revolution mean? Very simply, it's a concept developed by not Lenin, but by Gramsci, that elaborates on this idea that when dominant and ruling classes in a society, the rich and powerful, are unable to exercise political and ideological leadership, and they aren't able to do that very clearly, what they do instead is they frustrate the opportunities for other social groups to exercise that political and ideological leadership. Rather than using their power to establish their own hegemony and influence and control, they frustrate any other sources of counterpower that can potentially threaten that leadership, influence, and control. And they do this by displacing, redirecting, incorporating, or integrating those popular energies and aspirations into their own movement. And this is something that the ANC has done very successfully since 1994, but throughout its history. The first significant way in which the ANC has done this has been ideologically. It's something that has less sway and purchase now, but the ANC continues to position itself as the custodian of the so-called national democratic revolution. It still thinks of itself and presents itself as the steward of national liberation. And what that does is, as Niall said earlier, even though the ANC was never a working class party, it positions itself as a party that is sympathetic and concerned with working class interests. It says, unlike governments in other parts of the world, unlike, for example, the government in the United States of America, which is transparently hostile to working class interests. They have no interest in talking to working class communities. They say, we're a party that cares about working class people. In fact, we're a party that was entrusted with guarding the interests of working class people. And we're in the process of doing so. We are pursuing the national democratic movement faithfully. We are the stewards of the mass democratic movement. And the ideological consequence of this has been that it makes it harder to mount criticisms of the ANC or to, let's say, reveal the true extent at which they're invested in their own political and economic control. That is obviously easier to do now because we can all see it transparently and we can all see it clearly, but it played a massive role in the ANC's power in the beginning. And it's still the way the ANC thinks of itself today. The second significant way in which the ANC has undertaken passive revolution in South African society is straightforwardly the incorporation of oppositional energies and oppositional forces into its political mold. And this is where Gannett's contribution on the tripartite alliance is key, because that's the main example of that, right? Is that post-1994, rather than having or allowing for an independent labor movement, an independent communist party, the ANC was able to subsume that under its banner, under its infrastructure. And where it didn't subsume not just the SACP and COSATU, but the national civic organizations, it dissolved other oppositional energies such as the UDF. In this way, the ANC positioned itself as the key vehicle for social transformation. It said, rather than trying to independently by yourselves mount some program for social transformation, because we inhabit and control state power, we will be the vehicle for social transformation. We will have this relationship where even though we are this big conglomerate with different rooms under our names that might be oppositional at different points in time, we will work together in that sort of antagonistic but friendly relationship to realize a program of social change. And this is something that the ANC has been able to do quite successfully. Of course, we're now at a point in history where all of these social forces, I think, can recognize that this strategy hasn't worked for them. You can hear it in COSATU, you can hear it in the SACP, that a lot of members of those organizations have become disabused of the notion that by being in alignment with the ANC, being close to the ANC, who controls state power, that positions them favorably for their interests to be realized in society. The problem is it's too late. Once you embed a political or social organization into your infrastructure, you've demobilized it, you've defanged it, you've starved it of not only the opportunity and the resources to build something on its own, but you've completely decapitated its ability to do that, because now it has no existence outside of that relationship. And this has been a significant consequence of the ANC strategy of passive revolution that has enormous bearing on political possibilities in South Africa. Because it means, there's this debate that often happens where people wonder what would it look like if the SACP were to break away from the alliance? Would that be potentially a route for progressive forces in South Africa to reorganize? And I'm not someone who understands the structures of the SACP to a T, and I'm not someone who can read the tea leaves, but it'll be very difficult to, because what independent structure does the SACP have at this moment that is independent of the ANC's? The third and probably most significant way in which the ANC has pursued its program of passive revolution has been the way in which it has integrated and incorporated oppositional forces into its vast system of political patronage. Niall spoke earlier about how the system of political patronage came to be. It's a consequence of neoliberalism. It's not an alternative to neoliberalism. It's the very outgrowth of neoliberalism. But it has an enormous bearing on how we organize as well. Because of the fact that the ANC, well, I'm told I only have 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to have to breeze through this. I'm going to maybe try and push that to 7 with some condemnation from the organizers. But because the ANC controls state power, it controls state resources, because South Africa exists in a state of such severe deprivation, what the ANC strategy has been, especially at the level of the local state, at the municipal level, is that whenever there are demands placed on the state, the ANC strategy has been twofold. One, it's to meet enough of those demands to placate, to keep at bay, to satisfy just enough that people rest assured that, okay, there is interest, there is some leeway, but not so much that they get the idea that they can go all the way. But the second idea has been to entrench the notion that the only way delivery happens is through the ANC alone. It's through integration, through its patronage networks. By way of example, Tulani, if I may, he gave a very striking anecdote in our movement caucus earlier, relaying how the ANC in its public works programs, for example, people might protest and say, we want more jobs, right? The ANC will say something like, okay, but those jobs are only available to ANC volunteers. So what has it done then? It's taken people who are in a position of extreme desperation, who are pushing for intervention from the state, create more jobs, but it's conditioned those jobs on something that involves integration and incorporation into the ANC itself. What that means then is that whenever there is popular energies those energies are quelled by the ANC because they're able to channel those energies into the ANC party structure in numerous ways, whether it's by encouraging communities to compete over resources, whether it's in identifying members of those communities that they're able to pull aside and integrate and then have them as a face for the ANC at that level. And the important thing to say here is that when communities respond in the way that they do, we can't begrudge them. It's an extremely rational choice, I think, to make the decision to work with the ANC. Because think about it this way, right? If you could reduce it to two routes towards some kind of social transformation, the one route of social transformation is to work with the so-called left. I'm just going to say in kind of brackets, where we are promising, you know, we want to pursue a campaign of anti-austerity that can tackle housing policy in general, not just on a case-by-case basis, but can overhaul it. But there's no real kind of established record of delivery because the left is not in power. We don't control the resources. Or you can work with the political force who, even though you're upset with them, you know they control the resources, you know they control the power, and you know that if you are persuasive enough or if you make the right moves, you will get delivery. The rational choice is to pursue the latter. And that's what happens in many South African communities, and that's how they get effectively demobilized. So I have to wrap up now. So what I'm going to say quickly, I'm going to talk about what the consequences of this demobilization is and why does it matter to South African democracy today. The first is, what I've sketched illustrates how the conditions for organizing are profoundly disfavorable. They're profoundly hostile. They're very difficult too. And an outgrowth of this has been populism. People talk of populism as if it's this challenge to neoliberal capitalism, or it's this alternative to neoliberal capitalism. It's the very outgrowth of neoliberal capitalism, because neoliberal capitalism has decimated our capacity to organize. It's destroyed our political institutions. It's created this crisis of politics. And it's in that void, in that crisis of politics, of political engagement, that populists thrive. Because when you have a society that isn't polarized along lines of class, where you can't see a very clear difference between the rich who control resources and decisions and so on, and the rest of us who don't, you have recourse to identity. Because it's just easier. It's a shortcut. It's a shortcut to building a movement. It's easier to scapegoat foreigners. It's easier to scapegoat LGBTQI communities. It's easier to scapegoat women. So it's a consequence of demobilization in society, is that populism is a way, we're in a very perverse way of remobilizing society, but using shortcuts and shortcuts to identity. The second consequence of this is what's called de-alignment. De-alignment simply means that traditional party affiliations change. People stop voting for the parties that they used to vote for. But it doesn't mean that they vote for a new alternative or an alternative emerges that speak to them. And we saw this very clearly in the May elections, where the ANC lost millions of voters. Their vote share dropped by 17 points. But even though that happened, it wasn't that people voted for alternatives to the ANC. They voted for versions of the ANC, right? The MK, the EFF, these are all offshoots of the ANC itself. So even though people feel their loyalty to the ANC slipping, that loyalty isn't really going elsewhere because there isn't anything else that is an alternative to the ANC. The only alternatives, so to speak, are versions of the ANC that give voice to that grievance. Now, because I have to close, there's something I wanted to touch on about how I think this has affected the way we think about organizing in South Africa. But the consequence of demobilization and another sort of, I think, important aspect of the election is the millions of people who registered to vote and didn't, and all of the people who didn't vote. But what I think this means for us, in a way, I think precisely the fact that we exist in this period of demobilization and disorganization, it means that our work is clearer than ever. I think over the last 15 years, we have fallen victim, not only here in South Africa, but across the world, to the fetishization of moments of rupture, where precisely because the conditions of organizing are so hard, we start to put all of our hopes on some upsurge that we think is going to turn the tide, right? Whether it's the Marikana moment, or NUMSA leaving the ANC, or Fees Must Fall, or Black Lives Matter, or the Bernie moment, or the Podemos moment, whatever it might be, we start to think, gosh, it's hard to organize people. If only social crises accumulated significantly, that there was a straw that broke the camel's back, and there was some upsurge, and we capitalized on that upsurge. But what we've learned over the past 15 years is those upsurges aren't alternatives. They aren't ways out of demobilization. They're symptoms of demobilization, which means we can't put our hopes on them. We can't hope that the things will get so bad that there's going to be some kind of insurrection, or that the masses are they're gonna just, get frustrated enough that something will happen, and that will be the moment where we capitalize. It's not going to work. The only option left for us is to do the painstaking work of trying to reorganize society, of trying to remobilize society. There are no shortcuts, unfortunately. The question before us all is how to do that, what is to be done. I don't have the answer, and this is where we look to you.
So it's our understanding that we use the next 2 days to continue unpacking what may have been started by movements yesterday, what we try to deal with today. We won't take questions in plenary. I want to hand over to Comrade Kia to tell us what to do next. But the issue of how we got here can do one or two things. It can be overwhelming to unpack how long it took us to get here and how demobilized we are. But we can then also reflect around the room and see organizations, individuals, people trying in small localized spaces to do something. It may not be the ruptures, but there may be enough individuals who may be few, but trying to work out in their small spaces what we need to do to undo how we got here and what state we're in. So hopefully we try and do some of that tomorrow and on the last day. I want to hand over to Comrade Kia. I apologize. We've run out of time. We're not going to take any further engagement, but I trust that we'll have enough spaces over the next 2 days to do that. Thank you very much for working with us on this graveyard shift, and I'm clear who spoke. It was Comrade William. And say goodbye with another Amandla.
My goodness, William and Suraya with the afternoon graveyard shift. Comrade Suraya, I'm concerned when you said, I'll wait for Comrade Gra to tell us what to do. My God, am I draconian? Wow, I need to check myself. But since I'm living under patriarchy, you shouldn't be surprised. I'm just emulating what I know. No, comrades, the feminists must not just shake their heads. They know what I'm talking about. So for the last session, comrades, we are just going to push till about 5:15. We won't be able to break into breakaway groups because of time. And some folks are yawning, so you know why. So we're just going to have an open plenary discussion. We'll pose a few questions, and then for each question, we'll take 2 hands. But those 2 hands are also responsible to know that these are not preambles, prefaces. You're not attacking Kia because she said something at 9 in the morning. Now is your chance. No. So 2 hands per question, and then we'll try to tie it together. My beautiful comrade sister will take us through the process. I'm just here to hold the mic.
Okay. Thanks, comrades. Look, I know people are looking forward to plenary, so we'll try hold our time together collectively better, Ngomso. and then we'll have more time for discussions amongst each other. What we're going to try to do is we've got 4 key questions to help us start to unpack today, and we'll have 2 rounds per question, 2 minutes per comrade. Is that okay? If we're left with time, then we'll do another. So the first question we wanted to ask are, what are the key barriers that we think are preventing ordinary people from reclaiming power in this current moment? Indeed, we're all inside social movement space. What is the thing that happens when we don't have money for the youth group, and so the youth group doesn't happen? And or beyond the local community strike, nothing happens on the other side of that. So we'll take our 2 comrades now at 2 minutes each, please. And then I'll come in with the second question.
Oh, no, you're shy. Don't be shy. Cindy, say you have a hand. Is it a hand? Okay, I'm coming to you with the mic. No, that's fine. Keep your mic.
I didn't want to give it to him, but I'm under mandate. That's my chairperson.
And that's what I'm saying. Ye man, you pet since you're under mandate.
The key barriers that we think are preventing people from seizing or taking power.
Thanks, Sido, and thanks, Kia. My name is Sindisa Monakali. I'm from the trade unions of learners. Some of them are here in the room. Comrade Kopano, leader, equal education. I think this question is also adding into the conversation we had yesterday, especially with the provocation by Comrade Dinga. And I think he kind of like answered this question for us through his provocation. And he says that the social movement or the NGO sector is he uses the word fragmentation. And we've seen it in the last 15 years, or in the last 30 years of a democracy. Because when people are not happy with what is happening in their movement, they tend to form something that is new. And they always use this word, which is, I find it, they don't debate it well, an alternative. And it's always the elite class within society that talks about this alternative. It is mostly not the mandate from the masses themselves, which is problematic. And these are some of the barriers in society that tend to compromise what we are trying to achieve. And why does fragmentation exist? And I think Comrade Thapelo earlier again says that funding becomes an issue. There are 1,000 climate change justice movements in South Africa. Same thing, housing and land. What else? Water, everything. Education, all of these things. But there's one mandate. Just because we differ maybe in certain ways of doing things, we tend to form new structures. So in terms of being united for one common goal, we tend to be different. And it's always hard, and it has been hard for the last 30 years to find each other in those spaces. So those are some of the barriers. And who benefits then from this fragmentation of social movement? It's the capitalist class still. The neoliberalism communists are talking about here. It's the ones that are benefiting from this. Because how many organizations or political movement are funded by the Ruperts and the Oppenheimers? They are not pushing for one agenda, but they are funding everyone. So to make sure that there's separation within trying to achieve this common goal. So if we don't deal with this, we'll still have this conversation even next year, comrades. Therefore, what is there to be done? One point, I promise. I said yesterday, and I will repeat it again, Comrade Kia, sorry. I am patriarch, I promise, it's just a point. Comrade Dinga, in his NUMSA keynote speaking, he says that we must form alliances and solidarity with each other. And I think that was key. But it doesn't say solidarity to come with a buzz and keynotes in panel through programs. And we've lost that. And this is why we will continue to have these barriers within a society. And was
in you we trust.
Good afternoon. I can't talk when other people are talking. Let me invite you tomorrow to a special birthday. 7 years old.
will be here tomorrow. We'll eat the cake. Eh? Thank you. Hey, they caught me off guard. I was sleeping. You know, sometimes when you sleep, you see something moving. Fear of the unknown. We are in fear. We don't know why we are afraid. One, on the political side, we are afraid to vote for another party. You spoke of offshoots. We are afraid of voting for the white because we are afraid they will come back with that attitude back to us. In the morning, I said our minds are colonized. Once we can decolonize, starting with oneself, fundamental Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Who am I? Your identity. Who am I? You know yourself as Emily. Who is Emily? Where is our political will? We lack that. But we love to go and toy or campaign or lobby to become local councillors, hey, have positions in the political arena. But here, back home, we don't have that. Have we got it? We must start by going back to the drawing board. Back home, start at home. Family, neighbor, streetwise, build the structures. We used to have those block committees. We used to have that. Where did we lose it? Huh? The other issue, my last thing, I put 3 points. Is the dissatisfaction of the status quo. What is happening now? We are not satisfied. We were talking of not being satisfied, not being satisfied, Now we no more toy, but we are still not satisfied. What should we do? Come up with strategies. No more claphoyers. We throw strategies to our enemy. Do we know who is our enemy? It's me and you. Me and you. We gossip around organizations at the funders. Boardroom. Yeah, you see Lamosa, monsters, what, blah, 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 blah. They fight the government and all that. Now the donors say, if I see you saying advocacy, right. But if you say lobby, wrong. Because you are fighting the government. So we should open our minds, start to restructure, start to think again, start to change the mindset. Halabalu, bye.
Thanks, Mom Ems. We've got a second question, and Andile, I want you to please start with this question, but it might tie into your answer anyways. Ne? I know you're going to be fine here. What are the political choices that led us to this political crisis? The political choices. And yet we're also trying to summarize the session we've just had. Yeah? And you know the answer to this question, and then you can mushroom your previous thoughts into that 2 minutes as well. I'm looking for a second answer. We'll take Asanda next to Andile as well. Amanda, I did see you. That's great. Maybe we do a third question there.
So afternoon, comrades. This is Andile Zulu from the Alternative Information and Development Center. Yeah, it'll tie into the second question, but I think in terms of barriers, a crucial thing is the fact that sometimes you don't recognize that neoliberalism is class warfare. It is deliberately a project not only to find new ways to accumulate capital and wealth, but it's also a project about restoring the power of economic elites. And if you look at what Will's contribution was, or throughout all the contributions in the day, you can begin to notice that the reason why we're facing this obstacle is because we're losing the class warfare as a function of how neoliberalism works. So, for example, they say that we have too much sovereign debt, and so we need to cut budgets towards healthcare and education. Now, for working class people, that demobilizes you, puts you in a situation of desperation. You aren't able to be involved in politics because you're trying to find a way to get healthcare and education for your children. They say that we need to get foreign direct investment, and so we need what they call flexible labor markets. We need precarious, cheap labor. And so that it applies again to what we've heard, where workers exist in these precarious, casualized industries where they're not able to build solidarity. The risk of unionizing, the risk of organizing is too high. They say that we need public-private partnerships. And consequently, it then means that our services, such as electricity, for example, become too expensive for us to afford. So every neoliberal policy since '96 has the function of not only accumulating wealth, but then through that accumulation of wealth, they're able to get power. Through that power, they're able to demobilize society, and the circle continues over and over again. So I think that's one of the critical choices that the ANC made a huge flop in. And I think it is also, in a sense, backfired on them now as a result of this recent election. But they're too committed to this program. And in fact, since joining the DNU, they're steepening down the road of neoliberalism, which means that all the obstacles that we've talked about are only going to amass and are only going to increase. But we have to understand that it's deliberate and that it is about waging war to maintain pathways of accumulation and power, and that the interests that we have and the interests that the state has as an institution that cooperates with neoliberal capitalists are counter, they do not mix and they do not mesh. So there's no room for compromise. And so I think our campaigns and our demands have to be about how do we restore power to people by providing them universal access to electricity, by demanding universal healthcare, by demanding for public goods and public services. That won't lead us to socialism, but there's no way that we can have the kind of mass mobilization that we want, that is sustained and that is organized, if too many people are precarious, unemployed, and poor. So I think we have to really consider the class warfare aspects of it, and that it's warfare, it's deliberate.
Hi, Asanda Ngosheng. I want to thank, I think the speakers. It was really amazing to listen to the very interesting and different opinions that are coming out. But I do want to caution one thing, which is like, I'm beginning to feel very old because I remember apartheid as a thing that actually happened and that I lived through. And sometimes when I hear people who are younger than me speak, I fear that because there isn't that remembrance, there's a sense of undermining the struggles that have been won and seeking totalitarian framings of everything that's wrong. So my caution is that as we talk about the things that have gone wrong, let us also be mindful of the things that have gone right. Because if we forget what has gone right, the very people that we are fighting for the things we don't yet have, will come and take even that which we have. And what I'm talking about is the fact that just 5 years ago, the US was funding termination of pregnancy all over the world. And it didn't have a lobby group for termination in the US because they took it as a given right. We are sitting now with a US that doesn't have termination of rights because they took it for granted. So my call for comrades is, as we talk about the things that are going wrong, please let us also emphasize the things that are going right that we do not want to lose. And let us also be mindful, as he said, about not being divided and conquered with this class warfare. We are being separated into social grant beneficiaries, and these conversations that happen around people being breadwinners and the breadwinner mentality. And there isn't an engagement in those conversations with the fact that the black middle class is funding this South Africa through its meager salaries, wherein the government hasn't engaged on black tax, and the fact that black tax is not just supporting your family. We are actually the government has abdicated its responsibility of supporting people, and it is now individuals chosen in every family who are doing this, and then the very same people turn around and point to those people and separate and divide them for the rest of the family, such that we end up in class wars that are actually manufactured, because most black people are one paycheck away from poverty in any case. But because we have bonds and we have cars, people automatically assume that there must be some benefits. They are very temporary.
Okay, thank you, Asanda. So, sorry about that. We're going to go to our third question. But Pindi, your reflections of question 2 will form part of your answer for question 3. And then I'm coming to you, my leader there in the black.
No, don't shake your head, comrade.
We are
In you we
moving.
trust.
Yeah, so the third question to the room is why do we have so few organized social movements and trade unions in South Africa right now? Okay, my brother there.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Thanks, Chair. My name is Pindi Legunene, and I had put my hand up for question 1, but I think it's quite related to question 3. Hey, they are relatives of sorts. And I just want to thank the speakers for centering a critique of neoliberalism in thinking about democracy and why we are where we are 30 years into democracy. It's something that I lamented about. I lamented that that was missing in much of the analysis around 30 years in the public discourse. So I'm glad that sort of features. My answer to that question is sort of linked to what Uzulu was saying. But I'm going to come at it from the perspective of, if it's class warfare, let's think about it in these terms. We are here, we are gathered in what used to be a prison. Let's imagine for a second that part of what neoliberalism does is to imprison our imagination. And when we do that, we start seeing how it's possible. And I'm going to talk about things at a micro level because I've spent the past year or so interacting with young people all over the country and about democracy and all of that. The first thing is that, the point I want to make is that neoliberalism undermines a number of things. Speakers have talked about how it undermines democratic politics. Neoliberalism undermines solidarity and a sense of the common good, the sense of the collective. In the streets, we say it's Kuluva for himself. And I can find other expressions, Kasisutu and all of those things, to give expression to that. A typical example is that where I come from, the labor of preparing for a funeral, Upila Mavich was my labor growing up. We knew if there's a funeral, you pitch, you've got your knife, you've got an apron, you participate in that process. Increasingly in my township now, that service is outsourced. We hire a catering company. And those who are poor, Shembas was born, are you following me? So this idea of Kuluva for himself, and it's not just, I don't think it just happens automatically. I believe it's linked to this comrade neoliberalism. And then then the second thing is that you must think about how neoliberalism undermines trust in democratic institutions, trust in the state and the idea of the public. We speak about it quite often with Abu Comrade Mazibuko and others, but working class people in this country don't trust the state. They've seen what happened in state capture, which was the red carpet was rolled out by these neoliberal policies and the erosion of state capacity and parceling out of the state and all of that. So right now, working class people actually don't trust the state. Use public hospitals and all of that, but many people don't want to be there and actually don't want to use those services.
Thanks.
The third thing is that, so let me quickly, the third thing is that there's this idea of defeatism. So the young people that I've been meeting with, especially around the townships of Devon, but Maragafan, it's all the same anyway. What's the point? So we are in this point where we are a defeated people. The defeatism, there's no way out, as well as this idea that our voices do not matter. and then participation in democracy won't change anything in any way. Because we've seen, even if we don't want certain things, the political incumbents of the state will still implement the certain policies that we don't want. And I really appreciate that Will also underscored how neoliberalism sort of polarizes, it fragments, it divides us. And in the end, it leads to these exclusionary politics that we see where we don't want people from Malawi, where we don't want people from Zimbabwe, and so on and so forth. I'll end there.
Thanks, comrade, and good afternoon. My name is Nyaniso. Siana is my surname. My background is from NUMSA. My input is going to be a little bit to say maybe our expectation from the ANC was too much. Maybe the ANC was not meant to take us beyond 1994. Maybe it was only meant to take us to liberate us from apartheid only. Therefore, after apartheid, there must be another organization that must take us and liberate the working class. And I remember this because even the South African Communist Party, what it termed two-stage theory. What was the failure? What was the failure from the SACP was to tell us when is that first stage is going to end and what will happen when that stage ends. Because as we continue, comrades, to discuss the challenges that are confronted by the working class, it reminds me that by 2007 already, in a policy conference of the ANC, Thabo Mbeki was very clear that the ANC has never sought to stop the ANC, the SACP, in championing its own socialist ideas. And he went further to the COSATU, but we did not want to listen at that time. We wanted to achieve socialism through the ANC, which I think now it is impossible, and it's very clear that it is impossible. But we are also not going to achieve through the South African Communist Party, which left the question, what is to be done, which was asked by Comrade Will. And in our communities, it's unfortunate, comrades, that we organize ourselves along political parties. Even if you are raising an issue that is affecting the entire working community, if it's not raised against a political party, that issue is not going to be taken up. Thanks.
Oh, I'd like to greet you all leaders. My name is Kopano Mulegwa. I want to come on the point of defeatism. I think this point of this defeatism is one of the major things in our communities, especially from young leaders. I think we are not exposed so much from the support from the organizations, because I think there is no support for us to able to embrace the change, the challenges that we are facing, especially in our schools or everywhere that we are. I think as you guys, you are here, maybe you can help us as young leaders from our communities to able to have the support that you will give us to able to stand. Because if we stand alone, I think we'll be opposed by people who have power over us. Thank you.
Say that there's two issues I want to raise. The one is when I listen to William and talk about the demobilization of civil society, what is problematic about it is that it behaves as if civil society has no agency, as if it was this passive entity that was acted upon by external forces. So as someone who was there, I was a young activist at the end of apartheid, and I'm telling you now, what we often forget is the personal aspects of things. I'm a feminist activist, people were tired. And the liberation movement didn't start in 10. It started when Jan van der Riebeeck put his foot down. That first Khoisan resistance wars. So our parents were tired of this thing, and we said we had won. The people that we want to put in power are going to deliver now for us all our dreams. And it's not a feeling that's limited to the apartheid era. Look at what happened to tech. Tech immediately started losing power the moment ARVs was rolled out. So I'm saying if we don't reflect on these things and learn what drives movements and powers of movement, then we're going to keep building movements and assume that it's going to sustain itself over time without having ebbs and flows. So I think the one lessons we have to learn is when we attain certain victories, it will feel as if things slow down. The second point I want to say is again about the personal and the political, is that one of the big failures of the liberation movement was to push to internalize those revolutionary values. So the main contradiction that's played itself out in the apartheid era is we had all this left speak, no? But if you looked in the lives of our leaders, there was very obvious and public contradictions, and those contradictions played itself out in civil society as well. So I do think the donors don't want to fund political education. They certainly don't want to fund feminist political education. But a big investment we can make in our movements is to inculcate those values, because that's what's going to anchor us through the difficult times. If I may say a last thing, and this has to do with Comrade Andili's contribution. Part of our problem is we want to wage a systemic war, no, against it's long-term things. When I think about patriarchy, I know I'm not going to see the end of it in my lifetime. So what I want to do as an activist, I want to bring relief to women now, which means that we have to look at where is it hurting now? No? Because we are engaged with movements where people are hungry. No, they can't wait 20 years for the system, the food system to change. We all should be engaged in this basic income grant war, because that is going to make an immediate change. So I think part of our struggle strategies, no, when we start reimagining tomorrow and that third day, is we need to figure out what are the short-term things we just have to all put our energies, whether we're fighting for housing or land or women's rights. What is the one or two things that's going to bind all our movements that we're going to say, this is what we're going to dial for? These are non-negotiables, because these are the things that's going to keep people alive and give them the energy to sustain movements. Because there's no way a working class woman in South Africa has time to be in a movement. If you're feeding children, fighting for your life every day, fighting not to get raped, there's no way. It's unreasonable to tax that same woman with building a movement. So we have to find those interim strategies to bring relief to people's our livelihoods while we're waiting this longer term revolution. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, comrades. For me, just maybe something that I felt was missing. So through the panel discussions and the inputs, we've been looking mainly at and reviewing the alliance and the labor movement, and we have totally missed civic bodies, grassroots-based movements and organizations, and what has happened to them over the last 30 years and why. And that is where most of us, I assume, are based, right? So whether it's the SRCs and the LRCs and the SGPs, whether it's the the civic movements and the civic organizations, the only civic organizations is these residents associations that we see now fighting back, the NIMBYs and these people, right? So we're not talking about what has happened to our civic movements, how that has also become political contested terrains. You cannot go and open an organization in a township. You must first go and consult the Sanko committee that is aligned to the political party. You cannot go to the street committee because it is Sanko street committees. Anything you have to go via these powers that may be, and how they themselves within the political structures have decimated our community structures that has worked for us as a people. And I think it's important that we need to review and relook and reconfigure what it is that we need to do, and how do we bring democracy back into these structures? How do we fight and reclaim our structures that was meant there for us? Many a times, some people have mentioned it, the ward committees and the inputs It's entirely party political, right? It's entirely, and our people are poor, our people are hungry. We are normalizing EPWP and CWD work and grants, right? So we need to go there, and we need to engage our people and stop. We've been saying it, talking for our people. As long as our people don't have ownership, as long as they haven't come up with the strategies and the tactics and the campaigns themselves, and as long as they don't feel valued and heard, our people won't join our movements. So we have to go to our people, ask them what their issues are. We have to bring democratic processes back, and they have to lead and determine the agendas. We can't be sitting here and determining the agendas for our people. We have to go back there to the shop floors, to our streets and our street committees, to whatever committees we are from, and then come here and say, comrades, we've got the mandates, we must plan. And then the other thing in terms of this warfare, economic terrorism that is being perpetrated against us, treason, we must go there. We must go there. We must, and I was mentioning it in one of the committees. I said, what is wrong? We're saying we must work at new tactics and strategies. We must go. It is unacceptable that our people are being assassinated. It is Thapelo, it's their political assassinations and so forth. With me, it's the gangsters, because I'm fighting the gangsters also, right? My name is up. Okay, so we must go back. We must grow our underground structures. We must move, and we must fight back. There's nothing wrong in arresting our own leaders and taking them. And let me not talk. Thank you.
Yeah, I've joined the SDUs. Thank you, comrades. This brings us to the end of our day today. We've got 2 hands still up. You'll be part of the first 4 tomorrow, okay? I was going to say you'll be the first 2, but it's 2 men. I can't deal. Parting shots. I know that people know their logistical plans for today, but I think we're all clear here that our crisis is because we are fighting class warfare. We've all agreed on those principles. And we're also saying that there's a problem here around figuring out how we build our own minimal viable program for the kind of democracy that we want to create. Ne? And Henrietta and others are going, but those things we must start local. I know I sound like who's like Vuyo Tembakwayo and his friends, but I mean it from a richer perspective here. But Tukopano says when we go back to local structures and go rebuild truly from the ground up, we mustn't forget an intergenerational and a deliberateness around giving capacity to young folks to be able to wage their own wars. No? Mama Emily says, while we're doing all of this work together, because Asana said we mustn't forget where we've come from. Mom M says, yeah, but we must decolonize ourselves as part of that healing process. To remember where we came from and to use that energy to create something robust that does the class warfare fight for ourselves now and for the future. Then Comrade Nisa talked about how all of this can only happen in this kind of environment with the social movements if we're in true solidarity with each other. Something that goes a little bit beyond me passing in comrade equalizers to your actions. And so how do we learn together so that we can build the kinds of structures and resistance that we want? Comrade Fatima says, no one's going to fund that thing. So how else can we creatively, in our new strategy and tactics, go do political work with one another? Those stories exist in this room already. Parting shot. Oh, I've covered everything. Comrades, well done for today. I will get into so much trouble. And Kosin, come back tomorrow. Say, we're building this thing. There's going to be a caucus outside here by the smokers. We're building an SDU, self-defense unit.